You think anyone cares what you say? The words hung in the fluorescent-lit hallway of Westfield Courthouse like poison gas. Officer Derek Paulson's hand connected with flesh before the sentence even registered, a casual backhand that split Dr. Nia Cross's lip and sprayed blood across her white blouse. The hallway camera blinked red, recording everything. Paulson didn't even glance at it. Why would he? In 23 years wearing that badge, he'd never faced consequences for anything. Nia tasted copper and fury. She didn't wipe her mouth, didn't touch her face, just looked directly into his eyes and smiled. The kind of smile that should have warned him that some people don't break when you hit them. They just start keeping score. We invite you to follow this story to the very end. Please like and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The morning had started 3 hours earlier with Nia Cross sitting in her sedan outside the Westfield Courthouse, staring at the building that would either validate years of research or prove her wrong about everything. The red brick structure looked unremarkable. Colonial Revival architecture, white columns that were supposed to suggest integrity, and an American flag that hung limp in the humid September air. She'd been inside exactly once before, 2 months ago, when she'd observed from the gallery for 6 hours and witnessed enough to make her blood pressure spike. Today she wouldn't be observing. Today she'd be participating. Nia checked her appearance in the rearview mirror. No jewelry, no makeup beyond basic foundation. Hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a plain navy blouse and black pants, the uniform of respectability, carefully chosen to be unremarkable. The goal was to blend in, to be just another defendant navigating the system. To see what the system did when you had no power, no connections, no leverage. She reached into her bag and touched the compact recording device tucked in the interior pocket. Legal in this state. Attorney approved. Insurance. Her phone buzzed. A text from Governor Patricia Reeves. Ready? Nia typed back. Walking in now. Remember, you can pull the plug anytime. Just say the word. Not gonna need to. That's what worries me. Nia smiled and put the phone away. Patricia had been skeptical from the start. You're going to put yourself through this? Actually get arrested, go to court, face the whole machinery? But Patricia also understood what Nia had been trying to explain for 5 years. You can't reform a system you haven't experienced. You can't fix what you can't see. And the view from the judge's bench or the governor's mansion showed you exactly nothing about what happened to ordinary people when they fell into the gears. Nia grabbed her bag and stepped out of the car. The parking lot was half empty. Court didn't start until 9, and it was only 7:45. She'd come early on purpose, to watch the morning shift arrive, to see who talked to whom, to map the invisible relationships that made this courthouse run the way it did. She walked toward the entrance, and that's when she saw him. Officer Derek Paulson emerged from a patrol car with the swagger of a man who'd never been told no. 6'2", maybe 220, with shoulders that strained his uniform and a jawline that belonged in a recruitment poster. He had the kind of face people instinctively trusted, square, clean-cut, the quintessential all-American cop. But Nia had read his file. 37 complaints in 23 years. Not one sustained. 12 excessive force allegations. 2 lawsuits settled quietly by the city. And a pattern of testimony in this courthouse that defense attorneys whispered about but never challenged directly because challenging Paulson meant losing. He caught her looking and grinned, the kind of grin that said he knew exactly what power looked like, and she wasn't it. Nia kept walking. Inside, the courthouse smelled like floor wax and anxiety. The security checkpoint was staffed by 2 officers who looked half asleep. Nia placed her bag on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector without incident. She collected her things and headed toward the stairs. The second-floor hallway was lined with benches, and they were already filling up. Defendants, mostly. You could tell by the body language, the hunched shoulders, the nervous glances, the way people clutched paperwork like life preservers. Families clustered in corners, speaking in hushed tones. A few lawyers in rumpled suits moved between clients with the exhausted efficiency of people who'd given the same speech 1,000 times. Nia found a seat near Courtroom B and opened the folder she'd brought. Inside was the citation that had started this entire operation. 2 months ago, she'd been pulled over for failure to signal on a stretch of road where she absolutely had signaled. She'd known immediately what it was. A fishing expedition, the kind of stop that happened constantly in certain neighborhoods. The officer had been young, nervous, clearly following a script. He'd asked for her license and registration, then spent 20 minutes running her information while she sat and waited. Eventually, he'd come back with a written warning and a citation for an expired registration that wasn't actually expired. She could have fought it and won in 30 seconds. One phone call to the governor's office, and the citation would have disappeared like smoke. Instead, she'd hired a public defender, insisted on going through the system like anyone else, and requested assignment to Westfield Courthouse specifically, because Westfield was where the patterns were most pronounced. The data had been screaming it for years. Conviction rates that varied wildly based on defendant race, sentencing disparities that defied explanation, a revolving door between the prosecutor's office and the judge's chambers. But data was one thing, experience was another. First time? Nia looked up. The speaker was a woman in her 50s, heavy-set, with tired eyes and a McDonald's uniform. She held a folder similar to Nia's. That obvious? Nia asked. The woman smiled without humor. You're still sitting up straight. Give it an hour. What are you here for? Driving with a suspended license. Got suspended because I missed a payment on a speeding ticket. Couldn't make the payment because my hours got cut. Now I'm looking at jail time because I drove to work. She shook her head. System makes sense if you squint. You have a lawyer? Public defender. Met him for 5 minutes last week. He told me to plead guilty and hope for mercy. She laughed bitterly. Mercy in this courthouse. Nia wanted to tell her that she was going to fix this, that in 6 months this entire building would operate differently, but she couldn't, not yet. So she just nodded and said, I hope it works out. Hope's cheap, the woman replied. Justice costs. The courtroom doors opened at 8:30. Nia filed in with everyone else and found a seat in the middle of the gallery. The room was standard, wood paneling, state seal on the wall, jury box to the right, judge's bench elevated and imposing. The American flag stood in the corner like a promise the building had stopped keeping decades ago. She watched people filter in. The prosecutors arrived in a pack, 3 men, 2 women, all white, all wearing expressions of casual confidence. They took their table and immediately started joking with the clerk, an older white woman with reading glasses on a chain. Old friends. Comfortable. The public defenders came in separately, looking harassed. They clutched overstuffed folders and immediately huddled with clients, speaking quickly, pointing at paperwork. Nia caught fragments of conversation. Best deal you're going to get. Judge won't go for that. You really need to just accept this. At 8:55, Officer Derek Paulson strolled in like he owned the place. He nodded to the prosecutors. One of them actually stood up to shake his hand, then took a seat in the front row. He crossed his ankle over his knee and leaned back, completely at ease. This was his second home. At 9 o'clock sharp, the bailiff stood. All rise. The Westfield County District Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marcus Brennan presiding. Judge Brennan emerged from his chambers like a king entering a throne room. He was 60-something, with silver hair and a face that had probably been handsome once but now just looked hard. He settled into his chair with the casual authority of someone who'd been doing this for 30 years and had stopped questioning anything about 15 years ago. Be seated, he said, and everyone sat. The morning docket began. Nia had read case summaries. She'd studied sentencing data. She thought she was prepared. She wasn't. The first case was a 19-year-old black kid charged with possession of marijuana, less than an ounce, first offense. His public defender entered a guilty plea and asked for probation. The prosecutor requested 6 months in county jail to send a message about drug use. Judge Brennan sentenced the kid to 90 days and 2 years probation, plus court costs and fees that would total nearly $3,000. The kid's mother started crying in the gallery. The bailiff told her to be quiet. The second case was a 25-year-old white man charged with his second DUI. Property damage. Blood alcohol content of 0.15. His private attorney, a polished woman in a designer suit, entered a guilty plea and presented character witnesses. The prosecutor recommended house arrest and license suspension. Judge Brennan gave him 30 days house arrest, 1 year probation, and a fine of $1,500. The contrast was so naked it felt like satire. The third case was a woman in her 40s charged with retail theft. She'd walked out of a drugstore with 2 bottles of insulin without paying. Her public defender explained that her insurance had lapsed and she was diabetic. The prosecutor was unmoved. "Theft is theft, Your Honor." Judge Brennan interrupted before the defender could finish and sentenced her to 45 days plus restitution and fees. Nia sat in the gallery and felt her molars grinding together. She'd known it was bad. The data had told her it was bad. But seeing it in real time, watching the machinery grind through human beings like they were widgets on an assembly line, was something else entirely. She glanced at Officer Paulson. He was scrolling through his phone, not even watching. This was background noise to him. Routine. At 10:15, the bailiff called her case. State versus Cross. Expired registration. Nia stood and walked to the defendant's table. Her public defender, a exhausted-looking man in his 30s named Andrew Chen, met her there. They'd spoken once on the phone for approximately 3 minutes. "Okay," he muttered. "This is straightforward. Registration issue. Plead guilty. He'll probably waive the fine if you show proof of renewal. In and out." "I have proof," Nia said quietly. "The registration wasn't expired. The officer was wrong." Andrew looked at her like she'd just suggested they argue the moon was made of cheese. "Doesn't matter. Officer says it was expired. That's what the citation says. Fighting it means a trial, means coming back, means more time and money. Just pay the fine and move on. I want to contest it." "Ms. Cross, I have documentation. The registration was valid. This citation shouldn't exist." Andrew sighed the sigh of a man who'd had this conversation 1,000 times and lost every single one. "Fine. Your call, but I'm telling you, the judge is going to side with the officer." They approached the bench. The prosecutor, a blonde woman in her early 30s, was already smiling. She had the citation in front of her. "Your Honor," she began, "the state's position is clear. Officer Reyes conducted a routine traffic stop and discovered the defendant's registration had expired. We have the citation and the officer's report." Judge Brennan looked at Nia for the first time. His eyes did a quick assessment, age, race, clothing, and she saw the calculation happen in real time. He'd already decided. "Ms. Cross," he said flatly, "how do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor. The registration wasn't expired. I have documentation showing it was valid through December of this year." Andrew handed over the papers. Judge Brennan glanced at them for approximately 2 seconds. "This says the registration was renewed in August," he said. "The citation is dated July. Seems consistent with an expired registration to me." "Your Honor, with respect, the registration was valid from the previous year through December. The August renewal was early. I renewed before it expired. The officer's citation is factually incorrect." The prosecutor jumped in. "Your Honor, Officer Reyes is an experienced member of the Westfield Police Department with an exemplary record. If he cited the defendant for an expired registration, we trust his judgment." "Officer Reyes isn't here," Nia said calmly. "He's not available to testify to what he saw." "Don't need him," the prosecutor replied smoothly. "The citation speaks for itself." Judge Brennan leaned back. "Ms. Cross, are you questioning the integrity of a police officer?" The question hung in the air like a trap. "I'm questioning the accuracy of the citation, Your Honor. Which is my right?" "Your right is to plead guilty or not guilty." "You've pled not guilty. I've reviewed the evidence. The citation is clear. I'm finding you guilty as charged." He banged the gavel. "Fine of $200 plus court cost. Next case." Nia stood frozen. Andrew was already backing away from the bench, tugging on her sleeve. "Your Honor," Nia said, her voice level but firm, "I'd like to request a formal trial. I have witnesses and documentation that contradict the citation." Judge Brennan's expression darkened. "Ms. Cross, I've made my ruling. If you'd like to appeal, you can file the appropriate paperwork. But in this courtroom, my decision stands. Pay your fine at the clerk's window. Next case." "Your Honor, Ms. Cross, if you continue to argue with this court, I will hold you in contempt. Sit down or leave." Andrew physically pulled her back toward the gallery. "Don't," he hissed. "Just don't. You can appeal. Fighting him here will only make it worse." Nia let herself be pulled away. She walked back to her seat, her heart hammering. Around her, other defendants watched with expressions that ranged from sympathy to resignation. This was normal. This was how it worked. She sat down and took out her phone, opened the Notes app, started typing everything she could remember, the judge's exact words, the prosecutor's dismissiveness, the way evidence had been waved away like smoke. The morning continued, case after case. The pattern was surgical in its consistency. White defendants got plea deals, got house arrest, got probations. Black and brown defendants got jail time, got fees they couldn't pay, got sentences that would follow them forever. The prosecutors knew which judges to flatter. The public defenders knew which arguments to skip. And through it all, Officer Derek Paulson sat in the front row like a cathedral gargoyle, present and untouchable. At 11:30, the court took a recess. Nia stood and headed for the hallway, needing air, needing space to think. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard boots behind her. "Hey, you!" She turned. Officer Paulson was walking toward her with that same easy swagger. Up close, he was bigger than she'd thought. He had at least 6 inches on her, and the kind of bulk that came from both the gym and intimidation. "Yeah?" Nia said. "You're the one who got mouthy with Judge Brennan." "I presented evidence. That's not mouthy. That's how trials work." Paulson laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. "Trials, right. Let me give you some advice, sweetheart. You want to make this easier on yourself, you stop fighting and start cooperating. Judge Brennan doesn't like attitudes. Judge Brennan doesn't like evidence either, apparently." His smile disappeared. He stepped closer, and Nia had to force herself not to step back. She could smell his cologne, something aggressively masculine and cheap. "You think you're smart," he said quietly. "You think because you got some paperwork and a public defender who showed up, you're going to change something. But here's the thing. This is my house. Mine. I've been working this courthouse for 23 years. I know every judge, every prosecutor, every clerk. They trust me. They believe me. You? You're nobody. You walk in here with your little attitude and your folder full of papers, and you think that matters?" He leaned in. "It doesn't. Nobody cares what you say." Nia reached into her bag slowly, deliberately. She pulled out her phone and held it up, the camera pointing directly at him. "Say that again," she said. "For the record." Paulson's face went red. For a second, she thought he might grab the phone, but he caught himself. Instead, he smiled, and it was the ugliest smile Nia had ever seen. "You're recording me in a courthouse?" He shook his head, laughing. "Oh, this is going to be fun. See, what you just did? That's intimidating an officer. That's obstruction. Judge Brennan is going to love hearing about this. I'm recording a conversation in a public hallway in a state where single-party consent is legal. That's not obstruction. That's documentation. We'll see what the judge says." He turned and walked back toward the courtroom. Nia stood in the hallway, her heart pounding, the phone still recording. She stopped the recording and saved it with shaking hands. She'd known this was going to be hard. She'd known they'd push back. But there was something about the naked contempt in Paulson's voice, the absolute certainty that he was immune, that made her blood run cold. She took 3 deep breaths, checked the recording, clear audio, timestamp intact. Then she walked back into the courtroom. The afternoon session started at 1. Nia watched the cases unfold with fresh eyes now, cataloging everything. She noted which defendants got their charges reduced and which didn't. She watched the prosecutor and Judge Brennan exchange glances that spoke volumes. She saw Officer Paulson whisper something to the prosecutor during a recess and saw her laugh. At 2:30, her name was called again. State versus Cross. Additional matter. Nia stood, confused. Andrew Chen looked confused too. They approached the bench. The prosecutor was smiling. "Your Honor, Officer Paulson has informed me that during the recess, the defendant accosted him in the hallway and attempted to intimidate him with a recording device. We're requesting the court address this behavior." Nia's stomach dropped. "That's not what happened." Judge Brennan held up a hand. "Ms. Cross, did you or did you not record Officer Paulson in the courthouse hallway?" "I recorded a conversation, yes, but I didn't accost him. He approached me. He made statements I wanted documented." "So you admit to recording a police officer without his consent?" "This is a single-party consent state, Your Honor. I don't need his consent to record a conversation I'm participating in." Judge Brennan's expression could have frozen nitrogen. Ms. Cross, the hallway of this courthouse is not a public space for the purposes of recording. You do not have permission to record officers or court staff while they're performing their duties. That recording is inadmissible and potentially illegal. Your Honor, that's not accurate. The statute— I'm not interested in your interpretation of the statute, Ms. Cross. I'm interested in maintaining order in my courthouse. You will surrender that phone immediately. I will not. The gallery went silent. Andrew grabbed her arm. Ms. Cross— She shook him off gently. Your Honor, with all respect, you don't have the authority to seize my personal property without a warrant or probable cause of a crime. Recording that conversation was legal. You're asking me to destroy evidence. Judge Brennan stood up. Actually, stood up. His face was crimson. Ms. Cross, you are in contempt of this court. Bailiff, take her phone. The bailiff, an older white man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, started moving toward her. Nia took a step back. Your Honor, I am invoking my Fourth Amendment rights. You cannot seize my property without due process. Take the phone, Judge Brennan repeated. And that's when Officer Derek Paulson stood up from the gallery and walked toward the defense table. I got this, Your Honor, he said. He reached Nia in 3 strides. She saw his hand coming and tried to turn, but he was fast, faster than she'd expected. His palm connected with the side of her face with enough force to snap her head sideways and split her lip. Blood sprayed across her white blouse in a constellation of red. The gallery gasped. Someone screamed. Nia staggered but didn't fall. She touched her mouth, felt the hot wetness, looked at the blood on her fingers. Then she looked at Officer Paulson. He was smiling. Defendant's resisting, he said calmly. Assaulted an officer. You all saw it. I didn't touch you, Nia said. Her voice was steady despite the blood running down her chin. You just assaulted me in open court. Your Honor, Paulson said, ignoring her completely. I'm placing this defendant under arrest for assault on a police officer resisting arrest and obstruction of justice. Judge Brennan was nodding, actually nodding. Bailiff, take her into custody. Ms. Cross, you are remanded pending further charges. Bond hearing Monday morning. Andrew was saying something, objecting, but his voice sounded far away. Nia felt hands on her arms, the bailiff and another officer pulling her toward the side door. She didn't resist, didn't fight, just let them move her while her mind raced. The last thing she saw before they pushed her through the door was Officer Derek Paulson turning back to the gallery and Judge Marcus Brennan sitting down with the satisfied expression of a man who'd just squashed a bug. They took her to a holding cell in the basement. Concrete walls, metal bench, smell of industrial cleaner and despair. The bailiff removed her handcuffs and stepped back. Someone will process you in a few hours, he said. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The door clanged shut. Nia sat on the bench and touched her split lip carefully. It hurt, but not as much as it probably should. Adrenaline was still flooding her system, keeping the pain at bay. She could feel it, though, the sharp sting, the swelling starting. Her blouse was ruined, blood soaked into the fabric in dark patches. She leaned back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. They thought they'd won, thought they'd broken her, silenced her. They had no idea what they'd actually done. She reached into her bra and pulled out the backup recording device, the one they hadn't found because they hadn't bothered to search her properly. So confident were they in their power. She pressed play and listened to her own voice and Officer Paulson's voice, crystal clear, preserved forever. Nobody cares what you say. Nia smiled through split lips. She pulled out the business card she'd memorized the number from and asked the processing officer for her phone call. The officer, a younger woman who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation, handed her a phone. Nia dialed from memory. It rang twice. Governor's office, this is Maria. Maria, it's Nia. I need you to connect me to Patricia. Emergency protocol. There was a pause. 1 moment. 10 seconds. Then Patricia Reeves' voice, sharp with concern. Nia, what happened? Nia touched her lip and felt the sting. Everything happened, exactly like we thought it would. But Patricia, it's worse than the data showed. It's so much worse. Are you safe? I'm in holding at Westfield Courthouse. They've charged me with assaulting a police officer and contempt. Judge Brennan ordered my phone seized. Officer Paulson hit me in open court, and they're calling it self-defense. Silence. Then Patricia's voice, cold and precise. Do you have evidence? 2 recordings, full audio, the phone they tried to seize, and a backup they don't know about. Patricia, we have everything. The bias, the corruption, the violence, all of it documented. Nia, I need to know, do you want me to shut this down right now? I can have you out in 20 minutes. I can make this disappear. Nia looked around the holding cell. Thought about the woman in the McDonald's uniform facing jail for driving to work. Thought about the kid getting 90 days for a joint. Thought about every person who'd sat in this cell without a governor on speed dial. No, she said. Let it play out. I need to see the whole system, arrest to arraignment to bond hearing, the full experience. Can you keep eyes on me without interfering? Nia said, Patricia, trust me, this is what we need. They think they've won. Let them think that for 72 hours. Then we move. Another pause. Then, 72 hours, not a minute more. And Nia? When we move hard. You understand what you're triggering? I understand perfectly. This courthouse has been running dirty for decades. It's time someone turned on the lights. All right, I'll have attorneys on standby, documentation team ready. And Nia, Internal Affairs is going to lose their minds when they see that recording. Good. Let them. She hung up and handed the phone back to the processing officer. Thanks, Nia said. The officer nodded slowly. That lip looks bad. You want ice? I want it to look exactly this bad for the next 72 hours. Take a picture if you need to. I want documentation of every hour I'm in here. The officer's eyes widened slightly. She was putting pieces together. You want me to photograph your injuries? Every 6 hours, time stamped. It's for your protection as much as mine. Who are you? Nia smiled with bloody teeth. Right now, I'm nobody, just another defendant getting processed. But you should probably remember this conversation. The officer stared at her for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and took 3 photos from different angles. Logged, she said quietly. I'll check on you in 6 hours. Thank you. The door closed again. Nia sat back down on the bench. Upstairs, she knew Officer Derek Paulson was probably celebrating. Judge Marcus Brennan was probably relieved. The prosecutors were probably already drafting their case against her. Assault on an officer, they'd throw the book at her. Make an example. Show what happens when you question authority in Westfield. They had no idea they'd just created the evidence that would destroy them. Nia leaned her head back and let herself feel the pain for the first time. Her lip throbbed. Her jaw ached. There would be bruises tomorrow, swelling, the full physical record of what happened when the system decided you didn't matter. But she'd known this was possible. She'd prepared for it. And now she had something nobody else who'd been hit in that courtroom had ever possessed. Documentation, witnesses, and the full power of the governor's office waiting in the wings. 72 hours. 3 days to experience what thousands of people experienced every year in this building. 3 days to map every crack in the foundation. Then the hammer would fall. She closed her eyes and waited for the next phase. Outside her cell, Westfield Courthouse continued its afternoon routine. Cases processed, sentences handed down. The machinery grinding forward like it always had, certain in its immunity, confident in its power. Inside the cell, Dr. Nia Cross, judicial nominee, researcher, and the most dangerous person currently in that building, sat in the dark and smiled through split lips. The clock was ticking. The holding cell had no windows, no clock, no way to mark time except by the rhythm of footsteps in the corridor outside and the fluorescent lights that never turned off. Nia counted seconds in her head, a meditation technique she'd learned years ago during her dissertation work when the stress had threatened to overwhelm her. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. When she reached 60, she made a mental tick mark. When she reached 60 tick marks, she'd survived another hour. She was on her 4th hour when the processing officer returned with ice wrapped in a thin towel and a bottle of water. Here, the woman said, sliding them through the slot in the door. Her name tag read, Officer L. Martinez. For your face. Nia took them gratefully. The ice stung against her split lip, but the cold felt good, reducing some of the swelling. She held it there and watched Martinez through the small window in the door. Thank you, Nia said. What's your first name? Martinez hesitated. Laura. Laura, how long have you worked here? 3 years. Why? Just curious. You seem different from the others. Laura's expression tightened. I do my job, that's all. Your job includes taking pictures of inmates' injuries every 6 hours? My job includes documenting everything that happens in custody, protects everyone involved. Laura paused, then added quietly, Usually. Usually? Laura glanced down the corridor, checking if anyone was listening. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You're not the first person Officer Paulson's hit. You're just the first one who seems like they might do something about it. Nia lowered the ice pack. Tell me. I can't. I shouldn't even be talking to you. Laura, I'm not asking you to testify or put yourself at risk. I'm just asking you to tell me what you've seen. Laura was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, she said, 2 years ago, a guy came through here, black kid, maybe 20, got mouthy with Paulson during processing. Paulson took him into the back room for a discussion. Kid came out with 2 broken ribs and a concussion. Filed a complaint. Nothing happened. Complaint disappeared. Kid dropped it after his public defender told him he'd lose and probably get more charges filed against him. Do you remember his name? Marcus Webb. Got sentenced to 18 months for possession with intent. He's at Rockville Correctional now. Laura looked directly at Nia. There are others, a lot of others. But nobody ever does anything because nobody believes us over Paulson. He's got friends everywhere. Judge Brennan, the prosecutors, half the police department. He's untouchable. What if I told you he's not? Laura laughed bitterly. Then I'd say you haven't been paying attention. You saw what happened in that courtroom. He hit you in front of 50 witnesses and the judge sided with him. That's how it works here. That's how it's always worked. Laura, can I ask you something? Why'd you become a cop? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Why does anyone? Wanted to help people. Wanted to make things better. Thought I could make a difference. She shook her head. Stupid, right? No, not stupid. Hopeful. There's a difference. Hope doesn't mean much in this building. It's about to, Nia said quietly. I promise you that. Laura studied her through the window, trying to figure her out. Who are you, really? You're not some random defendant. The way you talk, the way you handled yourself up there, you're something else. Right now, I'm exactly what I appear to be, an inmate in your custody. But Laura, when this is over, I'm going to remember you took those pictures. I'm going to remember you gave me ice. And I'm going to remember you told me about Marcus Webb. Laura backed away from the door. I have to finish my rounds. 6 hours, Nia called after her. Don't forget the next set of photos. Laura didn't respond, but Nia saw her nod slightly before disappearing down the corridor. Nia returned to her bench and pressed the ice against her face. Her mind was cataloging everything, names, patterns, the ecosystem of corruption that made this place function. Marcus Webb at Rockville. Laura Martinez, who still had enough conscience left to feel uncomfortable. Officer Paulson, who'd been doing this for 23 years without consequence. The pieces were falling into place like a puzzle she'd been solving for years. She'd spent 5 years studying criminal justice reform, 3 years specifically researching Westfield County, and the last 6 months planning this exact scenario. Governor Reeves had thought she was crazy. You want to get arrested on purpose? Experience the system from inside? But Nia had been adamant. You couldn't fix what you couldn't see, and nobody saw what happened in holding cells and courtrooms except the people who passed through them, powerless. Now she was seeing it, feeling it, living it, and she was documenting every second. The hours crawled past. Laura returned at the 6-hour mark and took more photos through the cell window without saying a word. Nia's lip had swollen to twice its normal size, and bruising was blooming across her jaw in shades of purple and yellow. Good. Let it be visible. Let there be no question about what happened. At hour 8, a different officer brought a tray of food, if you could call it that. Processed meat of questionable origin, white bread, and an apple that had seen better days. Nia ate it anyway. She needed strength for what was coming. At hour 12, the night shift came on. She could hear voices in the corridor, the change in energy as new guards took over. Nobody came to check on her. She was just another body in a cell, forgotten until the system needed to process her again. She used the time to plan. Monday morning, she'd have a bond hearing. Judge Brennan would probably set it high, maybe deny bond entirely given the charges. Assault on an officer, they took that seriously, or at least they pretended to when it suited them. The prosecutor would argue she was a flight risk, a danger to the community. They'd paint her as unhinged, violent, a threat to law enforcement, and she'd sit there quietly and take it. For now. Because in 72 hours, everything would change. Saturday morning arrived with the smell of industrial coffee and the sound of new inmates being processed. Nia heard shouting, someone crying, the clang of metal doors. The symphony of incarceration playing the same notes it had played for decades. Laura Martinez appeared around 8 a.m. with breakfast and a fresh ice pack. "How are you feeling?" Laura asked through the slot. "Like I got hit in the face by a cop," Nia said. "So accurate," Laura almost smiled. "I need to take more photos." "Do what you need to do." Laura snapped several pictures from different angles. The bruising was spectacular now, a Rorschach test in purple and green spreading across Nia's jaw and down her neck. "That looks bad," Laura said. "That looks like evidence," Nia corrected. "Evidence of what? Paulson's already filed his report. Says you lunged at him and he defended himself. Says you were aggressive and violent. His word against yours, and his word wins every time." "Not every time," Nia said softly. "Tell me something, Laura. In 3 years here, how many complaints have you seen filed against officers?" "Dozens." "And how many were sustained?" Laura was quiet. "How many?" Nia pressed. 2. Out of maybe 70, 80 complaints, 2 were sustained. Minor stuff, rudeness, procedural violations, nothing like what happens regularly. "And that doesn't bother you?" "Of course it bothers me," Laura snapped. "But what am I supposed to do? I'm one person. I report what I see and it goes into a file and nothing happens. I push too hard and I lose my job. I have a daughter. I have bills. I can't afford to be a hero." "I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document, take pictures, keep records. When the time comes, tell the truth." "And when is that time coming?" "Soon." Laura shook her head. "You keep saying that, but I've worked here 3 years and nothing ever changes. New inmates come in, get processed, get sentenced, get sent upstate. Officers do whatever they want. Judges back them up. Prosecutors look the other way. It's a machine, and machines don't stop just because one person gets hurt." "They do if you break the right part," Nia said. Before Laura could respond, another officer appeared in the corridor, a tall man with a shaved head and the kind of build that came from prison yard weights and steroids. His name tag read Officer K. Drummond. "Martinez, you done here?" he called. "We got 3 more coming in from county lockup." "Yeah, I'm done," Laura said. She looked at Nia one more time. "Good luck Monday." "I won't need it," Nia replied. The day stretched on with the agonizing slowness of incarceration. No books, no phone, no contact with the outside world except the 30-minute conversation she was entitled to with her public defender, which happened Saturday afternoon when Andrew Chen appeared looking even more exhausted than he had in court. They met in a small interview room, concrete walls, metal table bolted to the floor, chairs that had been scratched with decades of initials and profanity. Andrew dropped his briefcase on the table and sat down heavily. "Ms. Cross," he began, "we need to talk about Monday." "I'm listening." "The prosecutor's office is pushing hard on this. They're charging you with assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, contempt of court, and they're adding obstruction of justice. Together, you're looking at potential jail time, real jail time, 2 to 5 years if they pursue maximum sentencing. Based on what evidence? Based on Officer Paulson's testimony and the fact that you admitted to recording him without permission in a courthouse. I recorded a conversation I was part of in a public space. That's legal." Andrew rubbed his face. "Ms. Cross, please. I need you to understand the reality here. Legal and practical are 2 different things. Yes, you might be technically right about the recording, but Judge Brennan has already made his position clear. He believes you acted inappropriately. The prosecutor believes you assaulted an officer. And on Monday, you're going to walk into that courtroom with a public defender who's handled 200 cases this year and is going up against a prosecutor who has unlimited resources and a judge who has already decided you're guilty. So what are you suggesting? Plea deal. The prosecutor's willing to drop the assault charge if you plead to contempt and resisting. You'd get time served, probation, and this whole thing goes away. Nia leaned back in her chair. Let me understand this correctly. Officer Paulson hit me in open court, split my lip, left bruises you can photograph from space, and their offer is for me to plead guilty to resisting arrest? I know how it sounds. It sounds like extortion. It sounds like survival, Andrew shot back. Ms. Cross, I've been doing this for 8 years. I've seen what happens when defendants try to fight the system in this courthouse. They lose every single time. You think you're different. You think you can somehow prove the officer is lying and the judge is wrong, but the reality is you can't. You don't have witnesses willing to testify. You don't have evidence that the court will accept. You have a recording that the judge has already deemed inadmissible and a story that contradicts a 23-year veteran of the police department. I have injuries. I have documentation. You have exactly what every other defendant who comes through here has, Andrew interrupted. A sense of injustice and no way to prove it. I'm trying to help you. Take the deal. Walk out of here Monday with probation instead of years in prison. Nia studied him across the table. He wasn't a bad person. He was just beaten down, ground into dust by a system that had taught him over and over that fighting was useless. How many clients had he told this same thing? How many people had he advised to take deals they shouldn't have taken because the alternative was worse? Andrew, she said gently, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not taking the deal. Ms. Cross, I'm not taking it. Tell the prosecutor I'll see them in court Monday morning. Andrew stared at her like she'd just announced plans to swim to the moon. Do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand what's going to happen? Better than you think. This is insane. You're throwing away your freedom because of what? Pride? Principles? Those things don't mean anything when you're sitting in a cell upstate for 5 years. They mean everything, Nia said quietly, and I'm not going to prison, but I need you to trust me on this. Trust you? I don't even know you. You show up in my caseload Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, you're in holding with 4 felony charges. Now you're telling me to trust you while you reject a deal that could save you years of your life? Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Andrew gathered his papers with sharp, frustrated movements. Fine, it's your life. I'll inform the prosecutor you're rejecting the offer. But Ms. Cross, when you're standing in front of Judge Brennan on Monday and he's sentencing you to the maximum, remember that I tried to help you. I will, Nia said. And Andrew, when this is all over, remember that you did your job. You gave me the best advice you could with the information you had. That matters. He looked at her strangely, trying to parse what she meant. Then he knocked on the door to signal the guard. Good luck, he said, and it sounded like a eulogy. Saturday night was worse than Friday. The holding area was fuller, weekend arrests flooding in, drunk and disorderly, domestic disputes. The usual chaos of Friday night caught up with Saturday morning. Nia could hear shouting, someone singing off-key, the guards yelling for quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. She lay on the metal bench and counted ceiling tiles. 36. She'd counted them 17 times now. Anything to keep her mind occupied, to prevent herself from thinking too hard about what came next. She wasn't afraid. That surprised her. She'd expected fear, expected to feel the weight of the situation pressing down, the reality of potential prison time making her second-guess everything. But instead she felt calm, focused, like an athlete before a big game or a surgeon before a critical operation. She'd prepared for this, trained for it. Now it was just execution. Sunday morning brought Laura Martinez again with breakfast and more documentation photos. The bruising had deepened overnight, spectacular shades of purple and black that covered the left side of Nia's face like war paint. Jesus, Laura muttered when she saw it. Does it hurt? Everything hurts, but it looks worse than it feels. Laura took her photos from multiple angles. I'm putting these in a separate file, time-stamped, sealed, just in case. In case of what? In case someone tries to make them disappear later. I've seen it happen. Nia smiled through split lips. You're a good person, Laura. I'm just doing my job. No, you're doing what's right. There's a difference. Laura looked uncomfortable with the praise. She finished her documentation and turned to leave, then stopped. Miss Cross, what you said about things changing, did you mean it? Every word. Then I hope you're right, because this place needs to burn down and be rebuilt from scratch. Not burned down, Nia said. Renovated. The foundation can be saved. It's the people running it that need to go. Laura nodded slowly and left. The rest of Sunday passed in the same slow crawl of institutional time. Nia used the hours to mentally rehearse Monday morning. She knew how it would go. The prosecutor would be aggressive, painting her as violent and unstable. Judge Brennan would be dismissive, treating her continued resistance as evidence of mental instability. They'd present Officer Paulson as a hero defending himself against an unhinged woman. The bond would be set high or denied entirely. And through it all, she'd sit quietly and let them perform their theater, knowing that every word they said was being added to a record that would eventually bury them. Monday morning arrived with the sound of her cell door opening at 6 a.m. Officer Drummond stood in the doorway with handcuffs. Time to get processed for court, he said. Turn around. Nia complied. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists, not tight enough to cut circulation, but tight enough to remind her of her current status. Drummond led her down the corridor to a processing room where she was given back her belongings minus her phone, which had been logged as evidence. She signed for everything else and was then led to a holding area near the courtroom where other defendants waited for their bond hearings. There were 7 of them total, 5 men, 2 women, all in jail-issued orange jumpsuits. They sat on benches and avoided eye contact with each other, each person wrapped in their own private crisis. Nia recognized one of them from Friday. The woman in the McDonald's uniform, now facing jail time for driving on a suspended license. The woman looked at Nia, and her eyes widened at the bruises. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "System happened," Nia replied quietly. "How are you doing?" "Been here since Friday. Public defender says I should take a deal, plead guilty, serve 60 days, pay the fines." 60 days? Her voice cracked. "I'll lose my job, my apartment, everything." "What's your name?" "Sharon. Sharon Mitchell." "Sharon, I need you to remember something. Whatever happens in that courtroom today, don't give up. This isn't over. Do you understand?" Sharon looked at her like she was speaking another language. "How is it not over? I drove with a suspended license. They have me on that. I don't have money for a lawyer. I don't have options. You have more than you think. Just hold on a little longer." Before Sharon could respond, the bailiff appeared. "Cross, you're up." Nia stood and walked toward the courtroom. Her heart was beating steady and strong. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. The courtroom looked exactly the same as Friday, except now the gallery was fuller. Media had caught wind of the case somehow, and there were reporters in the back rows with notepads and cameras. Good. Let them watch. Let them document. Judge Brennan was already on the bench, looking irritated at the attention. The prosecutor, a different one this time, older and more senior, stood at her table reviewing notes. Andrew Chen was at the defense table looking like he hadn't slept all weekend. Nia was led to the defense table and told to sit. The handcuffs stayed on. Judge Brennan gavelled the room to order. State versus Cross. Bond hearing on charges of assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, contempt of court, and obstruction of justice. Prosecutor? The prosecutor, her name tag read Senior ADA Jennifer Walsh, stood up. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back severely, and the kind of sharp professional appearance that came from decades in courtrooms. Your Honor, the state requests bond be denied in this case. Ms. Cross has demonstrated violent behavior toward law enforcement, flagrant disrespect for this court's authority, and a pattern of escalating aggression that makes her a danger to the community. She assaulted Officer Derek Paulson in open court, refused lawful orders, and has shown no remorse for her actions. We believe she is a flight risk and a threat to public safety. Judge Brennan nodded along like he was hearing a rehearsed script. Defense? Andrew stood. Your Honor, Ms. Cross has no criminal record. She has deep ties to the community. She's employed, stable, and the alleged assault occurred in the context of her attempting to document what she believed was relevant evidence. We request reasonable bond commensurate with her lack of criminal history. She assaulted a police officer, Judge Brennan said flatly. The evidence will show that Officer Paulson initiated physical contact, Your Honor. I was in the courtroom, Mr. Chen. I saw what happened. Your client was belligerent and violent. Officer Paulson was defending himself in this court. Nia felt Andrew tense beside her. He was trying, she had to give him that, but he was working with no weapons against an enemy that controlled every part of the battlefield. Your Honor, Andrew tried again. My client's injuries suggest... Your client's injuries are consistent with resisting arrest, Judge Brennan interrupted. Officer Paulson used appropriate force to subdue a violent defendant. Ms. Cross, do you have anything to say for yourself before I rule? This was the moment. Nia could make a speech, could defend herself, argue her case, point out every flaw in their narrative, but that wasn't the play. Not yet. No, Your Honor, she said quietly. Judge Brennan looked almost disappointed that she wasn't going to give him another reason to add charges. Very well, the court finds that Ms. Cross poses a significant threat to public safety and is a flight risk. Bond is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial, which is scheduled for... He consulted his calendar. 4 weeks from today. Bailiff, return the defendant to holding. The gavel came down like a gunshot. In the gallery, Nia heard gasps. The reporters were scribbling frantically. Andrew was already standing to object, but Judge Brennan was done, rising from his bench and disappearing into his chambers. As the bailiff led Nia back toward the holding area, she caught sight of Officer Derek Paulson in the front row. He was smiling, satisfied, victorious. She smiled back. His expression faltered slightly. Back in the holding cell, Nia was processed again and told she'd be transferred to county lockup within the hour for pretrial detention. 4 weeks. They were giving themselves 4 weeks to build their case, to make sure the charges stuck, to bury her deep enough that she'd never dig herself out. They had no idea they'd just started a clock they couldn't stop. Nia sat on the bench and closed her eyes. 72 hours. That's what she'd told Patricia. It had been 68. 4 more hours. At noon, Laura Martinez appeared one final time with lunch and her camera. Last documentation, she said through the slot. You're being transferred after this. I know. Laura took her photos, professional, thorough, time-stamped. Then she lingered at the door. Miss Chit, Cross, I don't know what you're planning, but whatever it is, be careful. These people don't lose. They've been doing this too long. They're too protected. Laura, do you remember what I told you Friday night about remembering you? Yeah. I meant it. And after today, I want you to remember something else. Sometimes the people who think they're untouchable are just people who haven't met the right opponent yet. Laura frowned, confused. What happens after today? Nia checked the time on the clock outside her cell. 12:15 p.m., 45 minutes left. Everything changes, Nia said. At exactly 1 p.m., the power balance in Westfield Courthouse shifted so suddenly and completely that nobody inside the building understood what was happening until it was too late to stop it. It started with phones. In the gallery, in the offices, in the holding areas, phones started buzzing and ringing with news alerts. The reporters who'd covered the morning bond hearing looked at their screens and their faces went pale. They started making calls, urgent conversations in hushed tones. Then the calls started coming into the courthouse itself. The clerk's office phone rang off the hook. Judge Brennan's chambers received 6 calls in 10 minutes. The prosecutor's office was inundated. In her cell, Nia heard the change. The sudden acceleration of activity, voices rising in confusion and alarm, footsteps hurrying in corridors that usually moved at bureaucratic slowness. Laura Martinez appeared at her cell door, phone in hand, expression stunned. Ms. Cross, she said slowly, who the hell are you? I told you. Right now I'm an inmate in your custody. No, Laura said, holding up her phone. According to this, you're Dr. Nia Cross, Ph.D. in criminal justice from Yale, former prosecutor, current judicial nominee for the State Superior Court. And as of 20 minutes ago, you're the subject of a federal civil rights investigation that just went public. Nia smiled. Also that. Laura's hands were shaking as she held up her phone, the screen displaying a headline that had already been shared 10,000 times across social media. Judicial nominee assaulted in courthouse. Federal investigation launched into Westfield County justice system. "You planned this," Laura whispered. "You let them arrest you. You let Paulson hit you. You documented everything because you knew." She stopped, her mind racing to catch up with the implications. "How long have you been planning this?" 3 years of research, 6 months of preparation, 72 hours of execution. Nia stood and walked to the cell door, meeting Laura's stunned gaze through the narrow window. "And Laura, those photos you took? The ones you time-stamped and sealed in a separate file? Those just became federal evidence." The color drained from Laura's face. "Federal evidence?" The Department of Justice opened an investigation into civil rights violations in this courthouse at 9 a.m. this morning. They've been building a case for 8 months based on statistical analysis and pattern evidence I provided. What happened to me this weekend gave them probable cause to escalate immediately. Your documentation is now part of a federal investigation into systemic corruption, and your testimony will likely be required. Laura backed away from the door. "I can't testify against other officers. I'll lose my job. I'll be blacklisted from every department in the state." "You'll be protected. Federal whistleblower protections. And Laura, you won't lose your job because by the time this is over, half the people who could fire you will be facing criminal charges themselves." Down the corridor, voices were rising in panic. Nia heard Officer Drummond shouting into a phone. "What do you mean federal investigators? Where? When did they—" His voice cut off abruptly. Laura's phone buzzed again. She looked at it and her eyes went wide. "There are FBI agents in the building. They're serving subpoenas. Judge Brennan's chambers, the prosecutor's office, personnel files." She looked up at Nia. "They're locking down everything." "Good," Nia said calmly. "That's exactly what's supposed to happen." "But you're still in custody. You're still facing charges. How does any of this help you?" "Watch." 5 minutes later, 2 FBI agents appeared in the corridor, accompanied by a woman in an expensive suit who Nia recognized immediately as Margaret Chen, one of the top civil rights attorneys in the country. Margaret had been Patricia Reeves's personal recommendation, and seeing her here meant the governor had activated the full response protocol. Margaret stopped in front of Nia's cell. "Dr. Cross, I'm your attorney now. Your public defender has been relieved and the state charges against you are in the process of being dismissed." "On what grounds?" Laura asked, still standing nearby in shock. Margaret turned to her with the kind of cool professional assessment that came from 30 years litigating federal cases. "On the grounds that my client was the victim of assault by a law enforcement officer, false imprisonment, denial of due process, and conspiracy to deprive her of civil rights under color of law. The charges filed against her were retaliatory and without merit. We have video evidence, audio recordings, and witness testimony that corroborates every aspect of her account." She looked back at Nia. "The DOJ wants to interview you immediately, but first we're getting you out of here and getting medical documentation of your injuries." One of the FBI agents, a tall black woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward with keys to unlock the cell. "Dr. Cross, I'm Special Agent Lisa Warren. I need you to come with us now. There's a situation developing upstairs that requires your immediate attention." "What kind of situation?" Nia asked as the cell door swung open. "The kind where a judge is trying to destroy evidence and a police officer is currently barricaded in his office refusing to cooperate with a federal subpoena." Nia stepped out of the cell for the first time in 72 hours. Her legs were stiff, her face throbbed, and she was still wearing the blood-stained blouse from Friday afternoon, but she felt like she could run a marathon. "Take me to them," she said. The courthouse had transformed into controlled chaos. Federal agents moved through the corridors with boxes of files, their faces grim and professional. Staff members stood in clusters, whispering urgently, some crying. The usual atmosphere of bureaucratic immunity had been replaced by something Nia had never seen in this building before: accountability. They climbed the stairs to the second floor where Judge Brennan's chambers were located. The door was closed, but Nia could hear shouting inside. The judge's voice, high and angry, and a calmer voice responding in measured tones. Special Agent Warren knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. Inside, Judge Marcus Brennan stood behind his desk, his face purple with rage, jabbing a finger at a young FBI agent who was calmly holding a box of file folders. The judge's normally immaculate chambers looked like a tornado had hit it. Filing cabinets open, papers scattered, drawers pulled out. "You can't do this," Brennan was shouting. "I'm a sitting judge. I have judicial immunity. You need a warrant signed by—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Nia walk through the door. The transformation on his face was instantaneous. Rage shifted to confusion, then to something that looked like fear. "You," he breathed. "What are you? How did you—" "Hello, Your Honor," Nia said quietly. The formality of the title felt like a weapon now, sharp and pointed. "I believe you're acquainted with Special Agent Warren from the FBI's Civil Rights Division?" Brennan's eyes darted between Nia, the agents, and Margaret Chen. "This is entrapment. This is, you set me up. You deliberately provoked—" "I entered your courtroom Friday morning as a defendant with a legitimate case and documented evidence," Nia said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "You denied me due process, allowed an officer to assault me in open court, filed false charges against me, and denied me bond. I didn't set you up, Judge Brennan. I just gave you enough rope and you hung yourself." "Judicial immunity," he started again, "doesn't cover civil rights violations committed under color of law," Margaret interjected smoothly. "Nor does it protect you from criminal conspiracy charges, which is what you're currently facing. The immunity you're thinking of applies to decisions made in good faith within the scope of judicial authority. What you did Friday falls well outside that scope." Special Agent Warren stepped forward with a document. "Judge Marcus Brennan, I'm serving you with a federal subpoena for all case files, correspondence, and communications related to Dr. Nia Cross, Officer Derek Paulson, and any defendants who appeared before you in the last 5 years. You are also being placed on administrative suspension pending the outcome of this investigation." "You can't suspend me. The Judicial Review Board has already been notified and has approved emergency suspension based on evidence of ongoing civil rights violations," Warren continued. "Additionally, the State Bar Association has been informed and will be conducting its own investigation into potential ethical violations." Brennan's face had gone from purple to gray. He sank into his chair like his bones had dissolved. "I did my job. I maintained order in my courtroom. If defendants were disrespectful, if they violated rules, you violated their constitutional rights," Nia said. "Systematically, for years. And you did it because you could, because you thought nobody was watching, because you believed you were untouchable." She leaned forward, her bruised face inches from his. "You were wrong." Brennan looked at her, and for the first time she saw recognition flicker across his features. "The governor," he said slowly. "You're Patricia Reeves's judicial nominee, the one for the Superior Court seat. This was all planned. A setup from the beginning." "Not a setup. An investigation. There's a difference. You had every opportunity to follow the law, to treat me fairly, to apply justice equally. Instead, you chose to maintain a corrupt system that benefited you and your friends. That was your choice, not mine." Special Agent Warren gestured to the other agents. "Secure these chambers. Nothing leaves this room until it's been logged and copied. Judge Brennan, you're free to go for now, but you'll need to report to the federal building tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for a formal interview. Your attorney should be present." Brennan stood on shaking legs. As he passed Nia on his way to the door, he stopped. "You destroyed my career. 30 years on the bench. Gone." "No," Nia said quietly. "You destroyed your career. I just documented it." After Brennan left, Margaret turned to Nia with something that might have been admiration. "That was restrained. I expected you to hit him." "Violence isn't justice," Nia replied. "Besides, what's coming for him is much worse than anything I could do with my fists." They moved through the courthouse like a storm front, and everywhere they went the old order was crumbling. In the prosecutor's office, senior ADA Jennifer Walsh was being interviewed by federal agents while boxes of case files were carted out. In the clerk's office, staff members were being questioned about record-keeping practices and evidence handling. In the basement, Officer Drummond was cooperating fully, already providing names and dates in exchange for immunity. But Derek Paulson was another matter entirely. They found him in the courthouse's police office, a suite of rooms on the first floor where officers wrote reports and processed evidence. When the FBI had arrived to serve their subpoena, Paulson had locked himself in his office and called the police union, which had immediately dispatched attorneys and was threatening to sue the federal government for harassment of law enforcement. Special Agent Warren stood outside the locked door with two other agents and the union attorney, a sleek man in his 40s who looked like he specialized in making problems disappear. "My client is exercising his Fifth Amendment rights and declining to cooperate with this investigation until proper procedures are followed," the attorney was saying. "You don't have authority to serve subpoenas on active duty police officers without going through proper channels. We have a federal warrant signed by a district judge authorizing us to seize evidence related to ongoing civil rights violations," Warren interrupted. "Your client can exercise his Fifth Amendment rights all he wants, but he needs to open this door and allow us to execute our warrant. He's not opening anything until I've reviewed—" The door suddenly opened from inside. Officer Derek Paulson stood in the doorway, and the change in him was striking. The swagger was gone. The confidence had evaporated. He looked like a man who'd just watched his world collapse and was trying to figure out how it had happened so fast. His eyes found Nia immediately. For a long moment they just stared at each other. The officer who'd hit her, smirked at her, told her nobody cared what she said, and the woman who'd absorbed all that violence and turned it into evidence. "You recorded everything," Paulson said. It wasn't a question. "Everything," Nia confirmed. "Our conversation in the hallway, the courtroom assault, all of it. And before you claim your phone seized was the only copy, you should know I had a backup device you never found. Full audio, crystal clear, time-stamped, currently in federal custody." Paulson's attorney grabbed his arm. "Don't say anything, not one word." But Paulson wasn't listening to his attorney. He was staring at Nia with the expression of a man who'd just realized he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who documented 37 complaints against you over 23 years. I'm the person who interviewed 6 victims you brutalized who were too afraid to testify. I'm the person who mapped your pattern of behavior across 2 decades and connected it to 17 other officers in this department who operate the same way. And I'm the person who's going to make sure you never wear a badge again." "You set me up," Paulson said, and there was something almost plaintive in his voice now. "You came here specifically to—" "I came here as a defendant with a legitimate citation. You chose to approach me. You chose to threaten me. You chose to hit me in open court in front of 50 witnesses. Everything you did of your own free will. I just made sure it was documented." Paulson's attorney pulled him back from the doorway. "That's enough. We're done here. My client won't be answering any questions until we've had time to review all materials, and your client is suspended without pay effective immediately," Special Agent Warren said, holding up official paperwork. "Police Chief Daniels signed the order 30 minutes ago. Officer Paulson, surrender your badge, weapon, and any department property in your possession. You'll be contacted within 48 hours about scheduling a formal interview." Paulson looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to do anything except accept what was happening. But he was trapped, and he knew it. Slowly, with hands that shook slightly, he removed his badge and weapon and handed them to Warren. The physical act of surrendering them seemed to break something inside him. His shoulders sagged. He suddenly looked older, smaller, diminished. 23 years, he said quietly, almost to himself. "I gave 23 years to this department. And you spent those 23 years abusing your authority," Nia said. "There's a man named Marcus Webb currently serving 18 months at Rockville for possession charges. You beat him so badly during processing that you broke 2 of his ribs and gave him a concussion. He filed a complaint and you made it disappear. How many others, Officer Paulson? How many people did you hurt who didn't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back?" Paulson's face hardened. "They were criminals. They were resisting. I did my job. Your job was to serve and protect. Instead, you terrorized and brutalized, and now you're going to face the consequences you should have faced years ago." His attorney pulled him away from the door. "We're leaving. Don't follow us. Any further contact goes through my office." They left, Paulson walking like a man in a daze, his attorney already on the phone calling in reinforcements. Warren watched them go with grim satisfaction. That's not going to be the last we hear from him, she said. The union will fight this. They always do. Let them fight, Nia replied. Every day this investigation continues, more evidence surfaces. More victims find courage to come forward. More officers realize they need to cooperate or go down with the ship. Time is on our side now. Margaret checked her phone. The governor wants to see you. She's on her way here now with a medical team. We need to get you examined and treated, and then we need to debrief everything that happened this weekend. But Nia shook her head. Not yet. There's something I need to do first. She walked back through the courthouse corridors, past the federal agents boxing up evidence, past the staff members whose comfortable corruption was being dismantled piece by piece, past the courtrooms where justice had been perverted for decades. She went back down to the holding area where Sharon Mitchell was still waiting, still facing 60 days for driving to work, still believing she had no options. The holding area was nearly empty now. Most of the inmates from Monday morning's docket had been processed and transferred. But Sharon was still there, sitting on the same bench, clutching the same folder, wearing the same expression of defeated resignation. She looked up when Nia approached. Her eyes widened at seeing Nia in street clothes, free, accompanied by federal agents and an attorney who looked like she charged $1,000 an hour. Miss Mitchell, Nia said, I told you this morning not to give up. I told you it wasn't over. Sharon stood slowly. What's happening? Why are there FBI agents everywhere? Why is everyone saying the judge has been suspended? Because the system that was trying to send you to jail for 60 days just collapsed. Judge Brennan is under federal investigation. The prosecutor who wanted to make an example of you is being interviewed about civil rights violations. And every case that went through this courthouse in the last 5 years is being reviewed for bias and improper sentencing. Sharon's legs gave out. She sat back down hard on the bench. I don't understand. Margaret stepped forward. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Margaret Chen. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm offering to represent you pro bono. Based on what I'm hearing about your case, driving on a suspended license that was suspended due to inability to pay fines, there are significant due process concerns. I believe we can get your charges dismissed and your license reinstated. I can't afford. Pro bono means free. It means you don't pay anything. And it means that instead of spending 60 days in jail and losing everything you've worked for, you're going to walk out of here today with your case under review and your future intact. Sharon looked at Nia, tears streaming down her face. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. I know you're a woman who drives to work because she needs to survive. I know the system punished you for being poor, then punished you again for trying to fix it. And I know that's wrong. Nia crouched down so she was eye level with Sharon. The help I'm giving you today, I want you to pass it forward. When this is over, when you're back on your feet, I want you to remember what it felt like to be in this building facing jail time for trying to survive. And I want you to help the next person who's in that position. I will, Sharon said through tears. I promise I will. Margaret was already on her phone arranging for Sharon's immediate release and filing emergency motions to stay all proceedings pending review. Within 20 minutes, Sharon Mitchell walked out of Westfield Courthouse a free woman, represented by one of the best attorneys in the country, with her entire case on track to be dismissed. Nia watched her go and felt something tight in her chest loosen. This was why she'd done it. Not for revenge against Brennan or Paulson, though that was satisfying. Not even for her own vindication, though that mattered. She'd done it for Sharon and Marcus Webb and the woman with diabetes who stole insulin and the 19-year-old kid facing 90 days for a joint. For all the people the system had chewed up and spit out because nobody with power cared enough to stop it. Now someone did. Governor Patricia Reeves arrived at 4 p.m. with a motorcade, a media team, and a righteous fury that made even the federal agents step back. She swept into the courthouse like a hurricane and went directly to Nia, who was in a conference room being examined by a doctor who was carefully documenting every bruise, every cut, every mark left by 72 hours in the system's grip. Patricia took one look at Nia's battered face, and her expression went from fury to something that looked like pain. Oh, Nia. It looks worse than it is, Nia said. It looks like they tried to beat you into submission and failed. Patricia pulled up a chair while the doctor continued his examination. I want names. Everyone who laid hands on you, everyone who stood by and watched, everyone who participated in this travesty. You'll have names. We have documentation of everything. But Patricia, what we have now is bigger than individual accountability. We have evidence of systemic corruption spanning decades. This isn't about punishing a few bad actors. This is about restructuring an entire institution. We're doing both, Patricia said flatly. The federal investigation handles the criminal side, but I'm also establishing a state commission to review every case processed through this courthouse in the last 10 years. Every sentence, every plea deal, every disposition. We're going to identify victims of this system, and we're going to make it right. Margaret looked up from her notes. That's going to be thousands of cases, tens of thousands. The resources required, I don't care about resources. I care about justice. This happened on my watch, in my state, in a courthouse I'm responsible for overseeing. We failed these people. Patricia looked at Nia. You were right. The data showed it, the patterns proved it, but nobody with power cared enough to see it until you forced us to see it. I'm sorry it took this. Don't be sorry, Nia said as the doctor finished his examination and began photographing her injuries for medical records. Be effective. Take this moment and use it to change everything, not just Westfield, every courthouse in the state. Transparency measures, accountability protocols, independent oversight. Make it impossible for this to happen again. Already drafted, Patricia said, pulling out her tablet. I've had legislation ready for 18 months waiting for the right moment to push it through. This is that moment. The state legislature convenes emergency session tomorrow, and we're going to ram through the most comprehensive judicial reform package this state has ever seen. The doctor cleared his throat. Excuse me, but Dr. Cross needs rest. She's been in custody for 72 hours with inadequate food, no proper sleep, and significant physical trauma. I recommend immediate hospitalization for observation. No hospitals, Nia said. I appreciate the concern, but I need to be available for interviews, depositions, and media statements. We have a narrow window to control this narrative before the opposition mobilizes and starts trying to discredit everything we've done. The doctor's right, Margaret said. You need rest. We can handle media for the next 24 hours. With all due respect, you can't. I'm the story. I'm the evidence. I'm the person who experienced this system from inside and can speak to what it does to people. If I'm not out there explaining why this matters, the narrative becomes about me versus a judge and a cop, instead of about a broken system that destroys thousands of lives every year. Patricia studied her. You're not going to stop, are you? Even now, even after everything you just went through. Especially after everything I just went through. Patricia, I felt what it's like to be powerless in that building. I felt what it's like when the judge won't hear you, when the cop hits you and nobody stops him, when your attorney tells you to give up because fighting is useless. 72 hours, and I had you in my corner the whole time. Imagine living that way with no one coming to help, no governor on speed dial, no federal investigation waiting in the wings, just you and a system that doesn't care if you survive or not. She stood up despite the doctor's protests. I'm not resting until every person in this state knows that system is being dismantled. The press conference happened at 6 p.m. on the courthouse steps. Media from across the state had descended on Westfield, camera crews jockeying for position, reporters shouting questions. Federal agents had set up a podium with the state seal on one side and the DOJ seal on the other, a visual reminder that this was both a state and federal matter. Nia stood at the podium with Patricia on her left and Special Agent Warren on her right. Margaret stood slightly behind, ready to intercept any inappropriate questions. The setting sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, and the light caught Nia's bruised face in sharp relief. The cameras loved it. Here was visual proof of everything she was about to say. She stepped to the microphone and the crowd quieted. My name is Dr. Nia Cross. I'm a judicial nominee for the State Superior Court, a former prosecutor, and for the last 72 hours, I've been an inmate in the Westfield County Courthouse facing false charges filed in retaliation for documenting civil rights violations. Her voice was steady, clear, and it carried across the steps like a bell. I'm here today to tell you what happened inside that building, and more importantly, to tell you what's been happening inside that building for decades to people who couldn't fight back. She detailed everything. The traffic stop, the courtroom bias, the denial of evidence, the assault by Officer Paulson, The judge's retaliation. Her voice never wavered, never broke, even when describing the moment Paulson's hand connected with her face. The cameras captured every word, every bruise, every second of testimony that would be replayed on news channels for weeks. "But this isn't about me," she continued. "This is about Sharon Mitchell, who faced 60 days in jail for driving to work. This is about Marcus Webb, who was beaten by Officer Paulson and had his complaint buried. This is about a 19-year-old kid sentenced to 90 days for marijuana possession, while a white defendant with a DUI got house arrest. This is about every person who walked into that courthouse and was denied justice because of their race, their economic status, or their inability to navigate a system designed to benefit those already in power." She paused, letting that sink in. Today, the federal government opened a comprehensive investigation into civil rights violations in Westfield County. Judge Marcus Brennan has been suspended, Officer Derek Paulson has been relieved of duty, and every case processed through that courthouse in the last 5 years is being reviewed for bias and improper sentencing. But that's just the beginning. She gestured to Patricia. Governor Reeves is proposing legislation that will fundamentally change how justice operates in this state. Transparency, accountability, oversight. These aren't radical concepts, they're basic requirements for a system that claims to serve all people equally. The questions came fast after that, reporters shouting over each other. Nia answered methodically, precisely, never letting emotion override facts. Yes, she had planned to document the system. No, she had not entrapped anyone. They had made their own choices. Yes, she still intended to serve as a judge. No, this experience had not made her bitter. It had made her resolute. One reporter asked the question that was probably on everyone's mind. "Dr. Cross, some people are going to say you manipulated the system, that you deliberately provoked these responses to create a case. How do you respond to that?" Nia looked directly into the camera. "I walked into that courthouse as a defendant with a legitimate citation and documented evidence that I was not guilty. I followed every rule. I was respectful. I presented facts. The system chose to respond with bias, violence, and retaliation. If simply asking for fair treatment and documenting what happens when you don't receive it constitutes manipulation, then the system has bigger problems than anyone realized." Moasa, the reporter pressed, "But you were recording. You had backup devices. You clearly anticipated—" "I anticipated exactly what happened because I've spent 5 years studying this courthouse's patterns. I knew the statistics, I knew the complaints. I knew what happens to people like me when we enter that building. So yes, I documented everything, because documentation is the only weapon powerless people have against powerful institutions. And the fact that I was right, that they did exactly what the data predicted they would do, should terrify everyone watching this." Another reporter asked about Officer Paulson specifically. "There are already statements from the police union defending Officer Paulson's actions, saying you were aggressive and he was defending himself. What do you say to that?" "I say listen to the recording, watch the video, look at my injuries, and then ask yourself, if a police officer can hit someone in open court and face no immediate consequences, what does that officer do when there are no cameras? What happens in holding cells, in patrol cars, in dark alleys where nobody's watching?" Officer Paulson didn't suddenly become violent on Friday. He's been violent for 23 years. He's been protected for 23 years. The only difference now is that his violence was documented by someone who had the resources and knowledge to do something about it. Patricia stepped to the microphone then, her voice like steel. "Let me be very clear about what happens next. This investigation will be thorough, transparent, and uncompromising. Every allegation will be investigated. Every victim will be heard. Every officer, judge, or official who participated in civil rights violations will be held accountable. And when we're done with Westfield, we're reviewing every courthouse in this state to ensure this never happens again. Justice should not depend on whether you have a governor's phone number. It should be equally available to every person who walks through those doors." The press conference ran for 90 minutes. By the time it ended, Nia's face was on every major news network. Her story was trending on social media, and the hashtag Justice for Westfield was spreading like wildfire. Public outrage was building with the force of a tsunami, and politicians from both parties were scrambling to position themselves on the right side of history. Back inside the courthouse, in offices and conference rooms, the people who'd run this building like a personal fiefdom were watching their world burn. and there was nothing they could do to stop it, because Nia Cross had done something they'd never expected anyone to do. She'd turned their own system against them, and she'd documented every single second. The backlash came faster than anyone anticipated. By Tuesday morning, the police union had mobilized a full-scale counteroffensive that made military campaigns look casual by comparison. Their strategy was surgical and predictable: discredit the victim, defend the officer, and frame the entire situation as political persecution of law enforcement. Nia sat in Governor Reeves's conference room, watching the morning news shows with Margaret, Special Agent Warren, and Patricia's chief of staff, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, who'd been managing crisis communications since 6 a.m. The screen showed Union President Frank Kozlowski at a podium surrounded by uniformed officers, his face red with righteous indignation. Officer Derek Paulson is a decorated veteran with 23 years of exemplary service, Kozlowski was saying, his voice booming with practiced outrage. He has protected this community, put his life on the line repeatedly, and received commendations for his dedication. Now he's being destroyed by a political operative who deliberately provoked a confrontation to advance her own career agenda. This is not justice. This is a witch hunt. Behind him, a dozen officers stood at attention, a wall of blue solidarity. The visual was powerful, designed to make anyone watching feel like attacking Paulson meant attacking all police everywhere. Rebecca muted the television. They're good. I'll give them that. They've already got 3 state legislators calling for an independent review of your actions, and they've filed a defamation suit against you personally for statements made during yesterday's press conference. Let them file, Margaret said calmly. Discovery will be delightful. They'll have to produce Paulson's complete personnel file, all complaint records, every incident report. They're essentially handing us evidence gift-wrapped. The problem isn't the lawsuit, Patricia said from the head of the table. The problem is the narrative they're building. Look at this. She pulled up her tablet showing social media analytics. Overnight, there's been a coordinated campaign to paint Nia as an anti-police activist who entrapped a good cop. They've got bot networks amplifying the message, conservative media running with it, and enough real people believing it that it's gaining traction. Nia watched the screen showing clip after clip of talking heads debating whether she'd gone too far, whether documentation constituted entrapment, whether her judicial nomination should be withdrawn given the controversy. She felt a familiar anger building, the kind that came from watching people deliberately miss the point to protect their preferred narrative. They're going to keep pushing this angle, Rebecca said. By tomorrow, they'll have victims, people Paulson arrested who'll say he was professional, respectful, by the book. They'll find character witnesses. They'll produce commendations and awards. And they'll make this about you versus a decorated officer, instead of about systemic problems. So we don't let them control the narrative, Nia said quietly. We produce our own witnesses. The victims who were too afraid to speak before? Now's the time. Every person who filed a complaint that was buried, every defendant who was brutalized, every family member who watched their loved one get destroyed by this system, we put them on camera and let them tell their stories. Special Agent Warren looked up from her laptop. That's risky. The union will investigate anyone who comes forward. They'll dig into their backgrounds, find any criminal history, any reason to discredit them. These people could face retaliation. They'll face retaliation anyway, Nia replied. The difference is whether they face it alone or with federal protection and a platform that amplifies their voices. Agent Warren, your office can provide whistleblower protections, correct? For witnesses cooperating with a federal investigation, yes, but that's a formal process. It takes time. Then we expedite. Patricia, can your office establish a victim advocate program specifically for people impacted by Westfield courthouse corruption? Patricia was already typing notes. I can have it operational by end of week. State-funded legal assistance, counseling services, protection from retaliation. We'll make it easier to come forward than to stay silent. Margaret leaned forward. There's something else we need to address. Judge Brennan's attorney filed motions this morning arguing that federal overreach has compromised his due process rights. They're claiming the suspension was politically motivated and demanding immediate reinstatement pending investigation. That's absurd, Rebecca said. The man violated multiple civil rights statutes. Absurd doesn't mean ineffective. He's got 3 former state Supreme Court justices filing amicus briefs supporting his motion. They're framing this as an attack on judicial independence, arguing that if federal investigators can suspend a sitting judge based on unproven allegations, it sets a dangerous precedent. Nia stood and walked to the window. Outside, protesters had gathered, a mix of supporters holding signs that read "Justice for Nia" and counter-protesters with thin blue line flags and signs defending Paulson. The divide was stark, physical, a perfect representation of the larger battle being fought across media and courtrooms. "They're right about one thing," Nia said, still watching the crowd below. "This does set a precedent. It establishes that judges aren't immune from accountability when they violate civil rights. That's exactly the precedent we need to set." "The legal community is divided," Margaret said carefully. "Some judges see this as long overdue accountability. Others see it as a threat to judicial independence. We need allies in the judiciary if we're going to sustain this momentum." "I'll make calls," Patricia said. "There are judges who've been quietly frustrated with Westfield for years. Now's the time to speak up." Rebecca's phone buzzed. She read the message and her expression tightened. "We have a problem. Local news just broke a story. They've got video from the courthouse hallway showing the confrontation between Nia and Paulson. But it's been edited. They cut out the part where Paulson approaches first and makes threats. What they're showing starts with Nia pulling out her phone and Paulson backing away. It looks like she's the aggressor." "Where did they get the footage?" Special Agent Warren demanded. "Courthouse security system. Someone leaked it to a friendly reporter before the FBI could secure all recordings." Margaret was already on her feet. "That's destruction of evidence. That's obstruction. Whoever leaked that footage just committed a federal crime." "Finding out who leaked it doesn't help us right now," Patricia said. "The edited video is already viral. We need the complete footage released immediately to counter it." Warren shook her head. "The complete footage is federal evidence. I can't just release it to media." "Then we get a judge to order it released in the interest of justice," Margaret said. "Emergency motion filed within the hour. We argue that selective leaking of edited evidence compromises the entire investigation, and the only remedy is complete transparency." "That could take days," Rebecca countered. "By then the narrative is set. People will believe what they saw first." Nia turned from the window. "I have my copy. The backup recording that they never found. It's not federal evidence yet because I haven't turned it over." Everyone looked at her. "That's technically true," Margaret said slowly. "You recorded it personally, it's been in your custody, and until you formally provide it to investigators, it remains your personal property." "So I can release it?" "You can. But Nia, the moment you do, the union will claim you manipulated it. They'll demand forensic analysis. They'll argue it's been doctored. It'll create a whole new controversy." "Let them argue. The timestamp is embedded. The metadata is intact. Any forensic analysis will prove it's authentic. Meanwhile, the public gets to hear what actually happened. Paulson threatening me, telling me nobody cares what I say, the whole conversation." Patricia studied her. "You're sure about this? Once that recording is public, there's no walking it back. It becomes the centerpiece of everything that follows." "It should be the centerpiece. It's proof of exactly what I've been saying. Officers who believe they're above accountability, judges who enable them, and a system that protects abusers while silencing victims." Nia pulled out her phone. "Rebecca, I'm sending you the file. Release it through official channels with full context. Make it clear this is the unedited recording that the leaked video was cut from." Rebecca took the file with shaking hands. "This is going to explode." "Good. Let it explode." The recording hit the internet at 11 a.m. Within 20 minutes, it had been viewed 2 million times. Within an hour, every major news network was playing it in full. And within 2 hours, the carefully constructed narrative the police union had built was collapsing like a house of cards. Nia sat in the conference room listening to her own voice and Paulson's voice broadcast across every screen in America. The words that had seemed so threatening in the courthouse hallway took on even darker meaning in the clear light of public scrutiny. "You think you're smart. You think because you got some paperwork and a public defender who showed up, you're going to change something. But here's the thing. This is my house. Mine. I've been working this courthouse for 23 years. I know every judge, every prosecutor, every clerk. They trust me. They believe me. You? You're nobody. You walk in here with your little attitude and your folder full of papers, and you think that matters? It doesn't. Nobody cares what you say. The words hung in the air like evidence at a crime scene. Undeniable, damning. Exactly what Naya had said they were. The words of a man who believed he was untouchable. The response was immediate and fierce. Civil rights organizations released statements demanding Paulson's termination. Police reform advocates held press conferences calling for systemic change. Even some law enforcement leaders, the progressive ones who'd been trying to modernize policing for years, spoke out condemning Paulson's behavior as antithetical to professional standards. But the union doubled down. By 2 p.m., Kozlowski was back at his podium with Paulson standing beside him, the officer's face carefully arranged in an expression of wounded dignity. What you're hearing in that recording is a man trying to de-escalate a confrontational situation, Kozlowski said. Dr. Cross was acting aggressively. She was recording without permission, and Officer Paulson was attempting to explain courthouse protocol. His words have been taken out of context and twisted to fit a narrative that serves her political agenda. The reporter at the press conference pushed back. President Kozlowski, Officer Paulson clearly states that nobody cares what she says. How is that de-escalation? You have to understand the pressure these officers work under. They deal with hostile defendants every day. Sometimes their language isn't perfect, but imperfect language doesn't equal civil rights violations. Another reporter. What about the physical assault? There's video of Officer Paulson striking Dr. Cross in open court. Paulson stepped to the microphone then, speaking for the first time. His voice was measured, practiced, like he'd been media trained in the last 24 hours. What that video doesn't show is Dr. Cross lunging toward me aggressively. I responded with minimal necessary force to prevent her from potentially accessing my weapon. In that moment, I had to make a split-second decision to protect myself and others in that courtroom. I stand by my actions. It was a lie so brazen, it took Nia's breath away. She watched him on the screen, this man who'd hit her without provocation, now calmly rewriting history with the confidence of someone who'd done it successfully for 23 years. "He's good," Rebecca said quietly. "He's trained for this. Calm demeanor, authoritative tone, just enough detail to sound credible without saying too much. Juries love guys like this." "Juries won't decide his fate," Special Agent Warren said. "The DOJ will, and we have frame-by-frame analysis of that courtroom video showing exactly what happened. There was no lunge. There was no aggressive movement. He hit her unprovoked." "Frame-by-frame analysis won't matter to the people watching that press conference," Patricia said. "They see a calm officer explaining his actions versus what they're being told is a political operative with an agenda. We need to shift this back to the bigger picture." "Then we produce the other victims," Naya said. "Starting with Marcus Webb." Margaret looked concerned. "Marcus is currently incarcerated. Getting him transported for media appearances will be complicated." "I don't need him transported. I need a video call set up with proper legal protections. Let him tell his story from Rockville. Let people see what happens when you're brutalized by someone like Paulson and you don't have resources to fight back." "That's powerful," Rebecca said, already making notes. "Convicted inmate coming forward despite obvious risks. No political agenda, no personal gain, just truth." Special Agent Warren was typing on her laptop. "I can arrange it through the warden. If Webb's willing to cooperate with the federal investigation, we can make it happen by tomorrow." "Make it happen today," Nia said. "Every hour we wait is another hour the union uses to cement their narrative." By 4 p.m., they had Marcus Webb on a secure video connection from Rockville Correctional. He appeared on screen in prison blues, looking older than his 22 years, with a wariness in his eyes that came from 2 years navigating the violence and hierarchy of prison life. Naya spoke to him first, gentle and direct. "Marcus, my name is Dr. Nia Cross. I'm working with federal investigators looking into civil rights violations at Westfield Courthouse. I understand you had an encounter with Officer Derek Paulson 2 years ago. Are you willing to talk about that?" Marcus looked at someone off camera, probably the warden or a prison attorney, then back at Nia. "Why now? I filed a complaint. Nobody cared then. Why would they care now?" "Because now there's evidence, documentation, multiple victims coming forward. and federal protection for witnesses who cooperate. Marcus, what happened to you matters. Your complaint mattered even though it was buried. I want people to hear your story. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low but steady. Paulson beat the hell out of me during processing, said I had an attitude, said I needed to learn respect, took me to a back room and went to work. Broke 2 ribs, gave me a concussion. I could barely breathe for a week. Did you receive medical treatment? Eventually, after I kept complaining about the pain, prison doctor took x-rays, documented the injuries, told me to file a formal complaint. So I did. My public defender helped me write it up, submitted it through proper channels. 3 weeks later, I got a letter saying the complaint was investigated and found to be without merit. Without merit, Naya repeated. Even though you had documented injuries? They said I got those injuries resisting arrest during my original pickup. Said Paulson's use of force during booking was appropriate given my aggressive behavior. But I wasn't aggressive. I was scared and confused, and I didn't do nothing to deserve what he did to me. Marcus, the charges you were convicted on, possession with intent to distribute. Can you tell me about those? His jaw tightened. I had a joint on me. 1 joint. They found it during a search after pulling me over for a broken taillight. Somehow that 1 joint became intent to distribute, and suddenly I'm facing serious time. My lawyer told me to take a plea. 18 months. Told me if I went to trial and lost, I could get 5 years. So I took the plea. And Officer Paulson testified at your hearing? Yeah, said I was hostile during the stop, said I made threats. None of it was true, but who's going to believe me over a cop? Judge gave me 18 months and told me I should be grateful it wasn't worse. Nia felt the familiar anger building. Marcus, I need to ask you something difficult. Why are you willing to talk about this now? You've got time left on your sentence. Coming forward could make your life harder in prison. He looked directly at the camera. Because I watched you on TV yesterday, watched you standing there with your face all bruised up, telling people about what Paulson did to you, and I thought, that's what I looked like. That's what he did to me. But nobody believed me because I'm just some black kid with a record. You're somebody important and they still tried to bury you. If they couldn't silence you, maybe my voice actually matters this time. Your voice always mattered, Nia said quietly. The system just wasn't listening, but it's listening now. Rebecca worked her media magic. By 6 p.m., Marcus Webb's testimony was being broadcast across major networks with appropriate legal disclaimers and context. His face, his words, his pain, all of it visible, undeniable, human, and he wasn't alone. Within hours of Marcus's interview going public, other victims started coming forward. A woman named Teresa Gonzalez, who'd been arrested for a minor shoplifting charge and emerged from processing with a black eye and a broken wrist that she claimed Paulson inflicted. A man named David Chen, who'd filed 3 separate complaints about Paulson's aggressive behavior during traffic stops, all dismissed without investigation. A young woman named Keisha Williams, who'd been sexually harassed by Paulson during a DUI booking, told by supervisors that reporting it would only make things worse for her case. Each story was different in details but identical in pattern. Abuse of power, systemic protection, victims silenced by a machinery designed to prioritize officer credibility over civilian complaints. Special Agent Warren's team worked around the clock interviewing witnesses, documenting claims, building a case that grew more comprehensive by the hour. What had started as an investigation into Naya's specific experience was rapidly expanding into a pattern and practice investigation of the entire Westfield Police Department. By Wednesday morning, the pressure had reached critical mass. The mayor of Westfield called an emergency press conference announcing that Police Chief Raymond Daniels was taking voluntary leave pending an independent review of department practices. The State Bar Association announced formal ethics investigations into Judge Brennan and 2 other Westfield judges whose names kept appearing in complaint patterns. And the legislature, seeing which way the political winds were blowing, fast-tracked Governor Reeves's judicial reform package for an emergency vote. Nia watched it all unfold from the governor's office conference room, still looking like she'd lost a fight, which in a way she had. She'd lost the fight inside Westfield Courthouse, but she was winning the war. Margaret came in at noon with news that made everyone in the room sit up straight. Judge Brennan's attorney just called. His client wants to negotiate. Negotiate what? Patricia asked. Everything. He's willing to resign from the bench in exchange for recommendations for leniency on any criminal charges that might be filed. He's prepared to cooperate with the federal investigation, provide testimony about courthouse practices, identify other judges and officials who were aware of problems, and did nothing. He's trying to save himself, Special Agent Warren said. Of course he is. But he's also offering to burn down the entire corrupt infrastructure he helped build. If his testimony is as comprehensive as his attorney suggests, we could implicate dozens of officials across multiple counties. Nia stood and paced to the window. Below, the protesters were still there, though now the pro-Paulson contingent had shrunk considerably while the justice reform crowd had grown. Public opinion was shifting, slowly but measurably. What does he want? She asked without turning around. No jail time. Resignation with pension intact, immunity from civil liability. No. Nia turned to face them. He doesn't get to walk away clean. He spent 30 years on that bench destroying lives. Sharon Mitchell, Marcus Webb, that 19-year-old kid facing 90 days for marijuana. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people whose lives were derailed because Judge Brennan couldn't be bothered to apply justice fairly. He doesn't get to resign with his pension and sail off into retirement. I agree emotionally, Margaret said carefully, but practically, his cooperation could dismantle corruption across the entire state judicial system. We're talking about evidence that could lead to dozens of prosecutions. Then he cooperates without immunity. He testifies, he provides documentation, and then he faces the consequences of his actions like everyone else has to. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Nia's right. We don't negotiate with people who spent decades violating civil rights. We prosecute them. If Brennan wants leniency, he earns it through cooperation and genuine remorse, not through backroom deals that let him escape accountability. The attorney won't like that, Margaret warned. I don't care what the attorney likes. Tell him his client has 24 hours to decide, cooperate fully, and face reduced but real consequences, or fight and face maximum consequences. His choice. Margaret made the call. 20 minutes later, she reported back, Brennan's attorney says his client needs time to consider his options. He has 24 hours, Patricia repeated. After that, the offer expires, and we pursue maximum charges. That afternoon, Nia did something she'd been planning since Monday. She drove to Westfield Courthouse, walked up those same steps where she'd been led away in handcuffs 4 days earlier, and entered the building as a free woman with federal agents clearing the way ahead of her. The courthouse was subdued, almost ghostly. Half the staff was under investigation or on administrative leave. The courtrooms were running on skeleton crews. The arrogant certainty that had permeated the building had been replaced by nervous uncertainty. People who'd spent years confident in their immunity now moved through the halls like they were walking through a minefield. Nia went to the holding area where she'd spent 72 hours. Laura Martinez was there, finishing her shift. She looked up when Nia entered and immediately stood straighter. Dr. Cross, I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to thank you. The photographs you took, the documentation you maintained, that's going to be crucial evidence. Laura looked uncomfortable. I just did my job. You did more than your job. You could have taken the minimum required photos and logged them without care. Instead, you were thorough, professional, and you kept them in a separate file to protect them from being disappeared. That took courage. I don't know about courage. Mostly, I just felt sick watching what was happening and knowing I couldn't stop it. But you documented it, and documentation is how we stop it from happening again. Nia paused. Laura, the federal investigators are going to want to interview you formally. You'll need to testify about what you witnessed, what you photographed, what the culture was like in this building. I know that's scary. I know it puts you at risk, but I need you to do it anyway. Laura looked at her for a long moment. Will it actually change anything, or are we just rearranging deck chairs while the ship keeps sailing? It's already changing. Look around. This building doesn't run the same way it did last week. People who were untouchable are facing investigations. Victims who were silent are finding their voices. The ship isn't just rearranging chairs, it's being rebuilt from the hull up. And what happens to people like me? Officers who tried to do the right thing but weren't willing to sacrifice everything for it? Do we get forgiven for our complicity or condemned for not speaking up sooner? It was a fair question, a hard question. Nia chose her words carefully. I think you get judged by what you do now. You can't change the past. You can't save the people who already went through this system before we exposed it. But you can help make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That has to count for something. Laura nodded slowly. Okay, I'll testify. Tell the investigators to call me. I'll tell them everything I've seen. Thank you. As Nia left the courthouse, she ran into Andrew Chen in the lobby. Her former public defender looked exhausted, carrying a briefcase that seemed too heavy and wearing a suit that needed pressing. He stopped when he saw her, clearly unsure whether to approach or pretend he hadn't noticed her. Nia made the decision for him. She walked over and extended her hand. Andrew? He shook it, still looking uncertain. Dr. Cross. I saw the news. All of it. I didn't know. When you were my client, I had no idea who you really were. You weren't supposed to know. That was the point. I told you to take the plea deal. I told you fighting was useless. I basically told you to give up. He looked genuinely anguished. If you had listened to me, if I had listened to you, I would have made the same choice thousands of other defendants make because they don't have options. You gave me the advice any public defender would give based on the reality of this courthouse. You weren't wrong about that reality. You just didn't know I was planning to change it. Still, I feel like I failed you. Andrew, how many cases are you handling right now? He laughed bitterly. 243 active cases. Most I've spent less than an hour on total. Some I've only met the client once. And you're doing that on what salary? $48,000 a year. While prosecutors get six-figure salaries, unlimited resources, and the presumption that they're the good guys. Nia shook her head. You didn't fail me, Andrew. The system failed both of us. It failed every defendant who walked through those doors. But that's changing. Governor Reeves's reform package includes massive funding increases for public defenders. You're going to get more resources, more support staff, more training. You're going to be able to actually defend your clients instead of just processing them through the machinery. You really think that's going to pass? It's going to pass because right now every politician in this state is terrified of being on the wrong side of this issue. They're going to fall over themselves voting for reform. And Andrew, when they do, when you have the resources you need, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to have to tell clients to give up because fighting was hopeless. And use those new resources to make sure no one has to hear that again. He nodded, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked like he might actually believe things could change. That evening, Nia sat in a hotel room downtown. She'd declined to return to her apartment, accepting Governor Reeves's security concerns that made public locations safer than private residences, and wrote. She'd been documenting everything since Friday, keeping a detailed journal of experiences, observations, and reflections that would eventually become part of her testimony and part of a book she was already planning. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. Dr. Cross? The voice was male, older, with the careful diction of someone choosing words deliberately. My name is Robert Morrison. I'm a retired judge from Camden County. I served on the bench for 32 years. Judge Morrison, how can I help you? I'm calling because I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. He paused, and she heard the weight in his silence. I knew about Westfield. I knew about Brennan and the others. We all knew. It was an open secret in judicial circles that courthouse ran dirty, that certain judges played favorites, that officers like Paulson got away with things they shouldn't. And we did nothing. We told ourselves it wasn't our jurisdiction, wasn't our responsibility, wasn't our place to interfere with another judge's courtroom. Nia sat very still, listening. I'm calling to tell you I'm sorry. I'm calling to tell you that you're right about all of it. And I'm calling to tell you that I'm going to testify to the State Judicial Oversight Committee about what I knew and when I knew it. Because you're not the only one who needs to be held accountable for silence. Judge Morrison, why are you doing this now? Because I watched your press conference. I saw your face, those bruises, and I thought about all the defendants who walked into courtrooms like Brennan's with nobody to protect them. I thought about how many lives were destroyed while people like me looked the other way because it was easier than fighting. And I realized I've got maybe 10 good years left on this earth, and I don't want to spend them knowing I stayed silent when I could have spoken. Your testimony could destroy your reputation. Other judges will see you as a traitor. Let them. My reputation isn't worth protecting if I built it on cowardice. He took a breath. Dr. Cross, when you get confirmed to Superior Court, and you will get confirmed, I want you to remember something. The judiciary isn't broken because of a few bad actors. It's broken because good people stayed quiet. Don't ever stay quiet, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I won't, Naya promised. And Judge Morrison, thank you. Your voice is going to matter more than you know. After he hung up, Nia sat in the quiet hotel room and let herself feel the full weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about Westfield anymore. This wasn't just about Brennan and Paulson. This was about a system that had been operating on institutional inertia and protected mediocrity for so long that people had forgotten it could be different. Now they were remembering, and the momentum was building like a wave that couldn't be stopped. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Brennan folded, full cooperation, detailed testimony. He starts giving depositions tomorrow. Nia smiled. The first domino had fallen. The rest would follow. Judge Marcus Brennan's deposition lasted 9 hours across 2 days, and by the time he finished talking, the map of corruption in the state judicial system looked like a spider's web with Westfield at the center. He named names, he provided dates, he detailed a network of judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials who'd spent decades protecting each other while grinding through defendants like they were nothing more than case numbers. Nia sat in the observation room watching through one-way glass as Brennan systematically dismantled his own legacy. He looked smaller than he had on the bench, diminished without the robe and the gavel and the power of the state behind him. His attorney sat beside him looking resigned, occasionally interjecting with reminders about immunity negotiations that everyone knew were futile at this point. He's thorough, Special Agent Warren said, standing beside Nia. Gives details without being prompted. That's either genuine remorse or calculated self-preservation. Does it matter which? Nia asked. Legally? No. His testimony is valuable either way. Morally? Warren shrugged. I've been doing this 20 years. Most people who cooperate do it to save themselves. But sometimes, in the process of saving themselves, they actually do some good. Maybe that counts for something. On the other side of the glass, Brennan was describing a conversation from 8 years ago where he and 2 other judges had explicitly discussed racial sentencing disparities and agreed to maintain them because, in his words, it kept certain communities in line and made our jobs easier. The federal prosecutor taking the deposition asked him to repeat that statement for the record. Brennan did, his voice flat, emotionless, like he was reading a grocery list instead of confessing to years of systematic racism. Margaret entered the observation room with her phone in hand. Derek Paulson's attorney just called. He wants to negotiate. Now? Nia turned from the window. After a week of denying everything? The union's backing away from him. Too much evidence, too many victims coming forward, and his own recording has been authenticated by 3 independent forensic analysts. They're cutting him loose to save the organization. So he's alone and scared and looking for a deal. Exactly. His attorney says he's willing to resign from the force, forfeit his pension, and cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. Nia felt a surge of cold satisfaction. What's he offering? Names of other officers with similar patterns, details about how complaints were buried, information about an informal network of officers across multiple departments who covered for each other. In other words, he's going to do what Brennan's doing, burn down the system to save himself. That's the deal, Margaret confirmed. The question is whether we take it. Warren spoke up. From a prosecutorial standpoint, his cooperation could be valuable. We're building a RICO case around systematic civil rights violations. Having an inside witness who can detail the conspiracy would strengthen that significantly. Nia walked to the window and stared out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was still sitting in a prison cell because of Derek Paulson. Teresa Gonzalez was still dealing with the trauma of being brutalized during booking. Keisha Williams was still afraid to drive at night because Paulson had told her he knew where she lived. No deal, Nia said finally. He faces full charges. If he wants to cooperate, he can do it without immunity. Let a jury hear what he did and decide what he deserves. That's risky, Margaret cautioned. Juries can be unpredictable, especially with police defendants. They might acquit. Then they acquit, and we live with it. But I'm not going to stand here and give Derek Paulson a pass because he's finally realized he's not untouchable. He had 23 years to do the right thing. He chose violence instead. Now he gets to face the consequences. Patricia, who'd been silent until now, spoke from the corner of the room. I agree with Nia. The public is watching this carefully. If we cut deals with the worst offenders, it sends a message that cooperation matters more than accountability. We need both. Margaret sighed but nodded. I'll tell his attorney. This is going to make the prosecution more difficult. Good things usually are, Nia replied. The next 3 weeks moved with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche. The federal investigation expanded to encompass 7 counties, 14 judges, and 43 law enforcement officials. Governor Reeves's judicial reform package passed the legislature with overwhelming bipartisan support, politicians from both parties suddenly discovering they'd always been passionate about criminal justice reform. The bill mandated body cameras for all law enforcement, established independent civilian review boards, increased funding for public defenders by 300%, and created a state-level oversight commission with real enforcement power. Sharon Mitchell's charges were dismissed. Marcus Webb was granted a sentence reduction hearing based on prosecutorial misconduct in his original case. Teresa Gonzalez, David Chen, and Keisha Williams all filed federal civil rights lawsuits, with Margaret Chen representing them pro bono. The Westfield Courthouse was placed under federal monitoring for a minimum of 5 years. And through it all, Nia Cross became the face of something that hadn't existed before. Proof that the system could be held accountable if you documented everything, refused to be silenced, and had the courage to absorb the punishment they'd throw at you. The confirmation hearing for her judicial nomination was scheduled for early November, 6 weeks after the assault that had started everything. The State Senate Judiciary Committee met in a grand chamber with high ceilings and portraits of stern-faced historical figures looking down in judgment. Nia sat at the witness table in a navy suit, her face finally healed from the bruising, though the split lip had left a small scar she'd decided not to have cosmetically corrected. Let it be visible. Let people remember. Senator James Bradley, the committee chair, opened the hearing with remarks that managed to be both supportive and cautious. Dr. Cross, your nomination has generated significant public attention and debate. Some view you as a hero who exposed systemic corruption. Others view you as a political operative who manipulated the system for personal gain. This committee's job is to determine whether you're qualified to serve as a superior court judge, regardless of the circumstances that brought you here. I understand, Senator, Nia replied. Let's start with the obvious question. Did you deliberately engineer your arrest and assault to advance your judicial nomination? Nia had known this was coming. She'd rehearsed the answer with Margaret for hours, but in the moment, she found herself responding with something more honest than their prepared statements. Senator, I spent 5 years studying criminal justice reform and 3 years specifically researching patterns in Westfield County. The data showed clear evidence of systemic bias, racial disparities in sentencing, socioeconomic discrimination in plea bargaining, and a complaint process that protected officers rather than holding them accountable. But data alone doesn't move people to action. Statistics don't generate political will for reform. She paused. I decided to experience the system I'd been studying, to see if my research matched reality. I obtained a citation through a legitimate traffic stop. I didn't fabricate charges or entrap anyone. I proceeded through the system as any defendant would, documenting my experiences. I did not engineer my assault. I did not provoke Officer Paulson. What I did was refuse to be silenced when the system violated my rights, and I documented what happened when I refused. Some would say that's manipulation. Some would say that's journalism. That's investigative research. That's what we expect from people who want to expose wrongdoing. They document it. They experience it. They bring evidence. If my methods make people uncomfortable, I'd suggest that says more about how uncomfortable they are with accountability than about the appropriateness of my actions. Senator Rachel Kim, a progressive Democrat from the Northern District, leaned forward. Dr. Cross, can you speak to concerns that your experience might bias you against law enforcement as a judge? Senator, My experience has made me more aware of how critical proper law enforcement is to a functioning justice system. The officers who brutalized defendants, who filed false reports, who protected each other, they weren't just hurting civilians. They were undermining every good officer who does the job with integrity. When I'm on the bench, I'll respect law enforcement testimony when it's credible and documented, but I won't automatically grant it more weight than civilian testimony. The badge doesn't make you more honest, your actions do. Senator Tom Davidson, a conservative Republican who'd initially opposed her nomination, surprised everyone by saying, "Dr. Cross, I watched your face on television for weeks. Those bruises, that split lip. I've got a daughter about your age, and I couldn't stop thinking, what if that was her? What if she walked into a courthouse and got hit by a cop and nobody did anything?" He cleared his throat. "I've been tough on crime my whole career, supported law enforcement without question. But your case made me ask questions I should have been asking all along. If we confirm you, what do you say to people like me who worry you might be too sympathetic to defendants?" Nia met his eyes directly. "Senator, I say that being sympathetic to defendants isn't incompatible with applying the law fairly. In fact, it's required. Every person who comes before a judge deserves to be seen as a human being with constitutional rights, not as a case number to be processed. That doesn't mean letting guilty people go free. It means ensuring that guilt is determined through a fair process where evidence matters, where rights are protected, and where the power of the state isn't abused." She leaned forward. "Senator, you're worried I might be too sympathetic. I'm worried about judges who aren't sympathetic enough, who've become so accustomed to the machinery of prosecution that they forget each defendant is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone who deserves justice regardless of their economic status or skin color." The hearing lasted 6 hours. Senators asked about her legal philosophy, her research methodology, her views on mandatory sentencing and qualified immunity, and a dozen other policy issues that would define how she operated on the bench. Through it all, Nia remained calm, articulate, and unwavering in her position that justice required both compassion and accountability. At the end, Senator Bradley called for a preliminary vote. The committee voted 9-3 to recommend her confirmation to the full Senate. The floor vote happened 2 weeks later. Nia sat in the gallery watching as senators she'd never met debated her qualifications, her character, and her fitness for the bench. Some praised her courage. Others questioned her judgment. A few tried to paint her as radical, dangerous, too activist to be trusted with judicial power. Senator Kim gave a speech that ended up going viral. "This body has confirmed hundreds of judges over the decades. We've confirmed judges who were competent and judges who were brilliant. We've confirmed judges who were fair and judges who were biased. But how often have we confirmed a judge who literally absorbed the violence of a corrupt system and transformed it into evidence for reform?" Dr. Cross didn't just study injustice, she documented it from inside. She has scars that prove she understands what's at stake when we get justice wrong. I can think of no one more qualified to wear the robe. The vote was 51-49. Closer than anyone wanted, but enough. Governor Patricia Reeves administered the oath of office in a ceremony that felt more like a coronation than a swearing in. The State House rotunda was packed with media, supporters, and notably, dozens of people who'd been victims of the Westfield system. Marcus Webb, released early after his sentence was vacated, stood in the front row wearing a suit someone had donated. Sharon Mitchell was there with her daughter. Laura Martinez came in her dress uniform, standing straight and proud. Even Andrew Chen showed up, looking less exhausted than usual. Nia placed her hand on a law book. She'd declined the traditional Bible, and repeated the words that had been said by judges for centuries. "I do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me under the Constitution and laws of this state, according to the best of my abilities and understanding." When she finished, the rotunda erupted in applause that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Patricia was the first to congratulate her, pulling her into a hug that was both personal and symbolic. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Nia corrected. "This doesn't happen without you backing me, without you being willing to take the political risk." "Are you kidding? This is the best thing I've done as governor. Every poll shows overwhelming public support for the reforms. I'm actually popular for the first time in 2 years. Margaret approached with Marcus Webb beside her. The young man looked different than he had on that video call from prison. Stronger, more present, like someone who'd been given his life back. Judge Cross, Marcus said, testing out the title. That sounds right. It feels surreal, Nia admitted. This morning I was Dr. Cross. Now I'm Judge Cross. Same person, different authority. Use it well, Marcus said seriously. There are a lot of people like me counting on you to remember what it feels like to be powerless in that system. I will never forget, Nia promised. And Marcus, Margaret tells me you've been accepted to community college. Criminal justice program? He nodded. Figured if I'm going to understand the system that tried to break me, I should study it. Maybe someday I'll be sitting where you are, administering that oath. I hope you do. The judiciary needs people who've seen it from both sides. The reception lasted 3 hours. Nia shook hands until her fingers went numb, accepted congratulations from people she'd never met, and gave the same gracious responses to the same questions over and over. But she didn't mind. This was part of the job, being visible, being accessible, being a symbol of what the system could be instead of what it had been. As the crowd thinned, Laura Martinez approached hesitantly. She was out of uniform, wearing civilian clothes, and she looked uncomfortable in the formal setting. Judge Cross, I just wanted to say... She stopped, searching for words. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For all the times I didn't speak up when I should have. For all the times I saw things that were wrong and told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Nia took her hand. Laura, you documented everything when it mattered most. You kept those photographs safe. You testified truthfully, even though it cost you friendships with other officers. You did speak up when it counted. It doesn't feel like enough. It's never going to feel like enough. We're always going to wish we'd done more, said more, fought harder. But Laura, you can spend the rest of your career making sure you never have to apologize again. You're still a cop. You still have a badge. Use it to be the kind of officer you wished existed when you were watching people get hurt and couldn't stop it. Laura nodded, tears in her eyes. I will, I promise. 3 months after taking the bench, Nia Cross sat in her chambers reviewing case files when her clerk knocked on the door. Judge, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Who is it? Derek Paulson. Nia went very still. Paulson had been out on bail pending trial, his case grinding through the legal system with the same agonizing slowness that most criminal cases endured. His attorneys had filed motion after motion, trying to get evidence suppressed, trying to dismiss charges, trying anything to avoid the trial they knew they'd lose. Does he have his attorney with him? No, ma'am. He's alone. Every instinct told Nia to refuse the meeting. She owed Paulson nothing. He'd assaulted her, lied about her, tried to destroy her, but she was curious about what could possibly bring him to her chambers now. I'll see him, but keep the door open and have security nearby. Paulson entered looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 months. The swagger was completely gone, replaced by the posture of a man who knew he was beaten. He stood just inside the doorway, not moving closer without permission. Judge Cross, he said quietly, thank you for seeing me. What do you want, Mr. Paulson? He flinched at the Mr., the absence of his rank, the stripping away of the identity he'd worn for 23 years. I wanted to apologize, face to face. Not through attorneys or press releases, actually apologize for what I did to you. You're facing federal civil rights charges and you decide now is the time for apologies? Your attorney must be having a heart attack. My attorney doesn't know I'm here, and yeah, maybe this is stupid. Maybe it hurts my case. But I've been thinking a lot about what you said at your confirmation hearing, about how everyone deserves to be seen as a human being. And I realized I've spent 23 years not seeing people. I saw threats. I saw suspects. I saw criminals who deserved whatever they got. I never saw humans. And you see them now? I see them now because I'm one of them. I'm the defendant. I'm the person facing charges, looking at prison time, watching everything I built get destroyed. And it's terrifying. Every day I wake up knowing my life is over, not because I'm going to die, but because everything I thought I was doesn't exist anymore. He looked at her directly for the first time. I hit you because I could. Because I'd been hitting people for 23 years and nobody ever stopped me. You were just one more person who didn't matter trying to question my authority. Except you did matter. You were documenting. You were planning. You were smarter than I gave you credit for because I'd spent so long assuming people like you couldn't hurt people like me. Is this the part where you ask me to speak on your behalf at sentencing? No. I'm going to prison, and I deserve to go to prison. I'm asking you to remember that. When you're on the bench and you see defendants who did terrible things, remember that some of us do eventually understand what we did. Some of us do feel remorse. It doesn't undo the harm, doesn't earn forgiveness, but it's real. Nia studied him carefully, looking for manipulation, for performance, for any sign this was strategy rather than genuine reflection. She saw only exhaustion and something that might have been shame. Mr. Paulson, I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate the apology. But here's what you need to understand. My job isn't to forgive you or condemn you. My job is to apply the law fairly to everyone who comes before me, including you if your case somehow ends up in my courtroom. What you did to me was wrong. What you did to Marcus Webb and Teresa Gonzalez and dozens of others was wrong. You get to live with that knowledge. That's your burden, not mine. He nodded. That's fair. More than fair. He turned to leave, then stopped. Judge Cross, I hope you're as good at this job as everyone says you're going to be. I hope you make it better, because it needs people like you a hell of a lot more than it ever needed people like me. After he left, Nia sat in her chambers for a long time, thinking about accountability and remorse and whether they could coexist with justice. She didn't have answers, but she had a responsibility to keep asking the questions. The trial of Derek Paulson happened in spring, 6 months after the assault. Nia didn't attend. She was recused from anything related to his case given her obvious personal involvement, but she watched the news coverage every evening. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, medical records, testimony from multiple victims, the recordings that showed his threats and lies, frame-by-frame video analysis of the assault. The defense argued that Paulson was a scapegoat, that he'd been doing his job in a high-pressure environment, that his actions were consistent with his training. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found him guilty on all counts: civil rights violations, assault under color of law, conspiracy to deprive constitutional rights, and perjury for his false reports. At sentencing 2 months later, Judge Patricia Whitmore, a black woman who'd been appointed to Westfield Courthouse as part of the reforms, gave him 8 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release. Officer Paulson, Judge Whitmore said, you were entrusted with significant power and you abused it systematically for over 2 decades. You brutalized people who were vulnerable, you lied to protect yourself, and you created a culture of fear and violence that corrupted an entire institution. This sentence reflects not just what you did to Dr. Cross, but what you did to every person who suffered under your authority and had no recourse for justice. Marcus Brennan's trial concluded 3 weeks after Paulson's. He'd cooperated extensively, providing testimony that led to indictments of 17 other judicial officials across the state. But cooperation didn't earn him immunity. He was convicted of civil rights conspiracy and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, loss of his law license, and forfeiture of his pension. The day after Brennan's sentencing, Nia held a press conference in her courthouse chambers. Behind her stood Sharon Mitchell, Marcus Webb, Teresa Gonzalez, and a dozen other people whose lives had been changed by the reforms that had followed Nia's 72 hours in custody. A year ago, Nia began, I walked into Westfield Courthouse as a defendant and experienced a system that was designed to process people rather than deliver justice. Today, that courthouse operates under federal monitoring with new leadership, new protocols, and a commitment to treating every person who enters with dignity and fairness. This is what accountability looks like. A reporter asked, Judge Cross, do you feel vindicated by these convictions? Vindication isn't the right word. I feel like justice happened, which is what should happen in every courtroom, every time, for every person. The convictions of Paulson and Brennan aren't victories to celebrate. They're corrections to a system that was broken. The real victory is what happens next, the reforms that ensure this can't happen again. What advice would you give to people facing similar situations in other jurisdictions? Document everything. Know your rights. Refuse to be silenced even when it's terrifying. And understand that changing systems requires both courage and patience. What happened in Westfield took 3 years of research, 6 months of planning, and 72 hours of experiencing the worst the system could do. Real reform isn't quick or easy, but it's possible if you're willing to endure what's necessary to make it happen. Marcus Webb stepped forward then, speaking without prompting. Judge Cross saved my life. Not the day she got me out of prison, the day she showed me that the system could be held accountable. Before that, I thought I was powerless. I thought nothing I did mattered because the cops and judges always won. She proved that's not true. She proved that documentation and courage and refusing to accept injustice can actually change things. So if you're out there watching this and you're in that same position I was in, powerless, scared, facing a system that doesn't care, remember Dr. Cross stood in that courthouse with a split lip and bruises, and she didn't break. If she can do that, maybe we can too. The courthouse where Nia now worked was 50 miles from Westfield, a modern building with glass walls and security systems designed to protect rather than intimidate. Her courtroom was on the 3rd floor, a space she'd helped design to feel less like a theater of judgment and more like a place where people could actually access justice. On a Tuesday morning in late autumn, she heard her first major criminal trial as the presiding judge. The defendant was a 19-year-old kid charged with assault during a protest. The prosecution presented their case with confidence. The defense attorney, a young public defender who reminded Nia of Andrew Chen, did her best with limited resources. When it came time for Nia to rule on several evidentiary motions, she found herself thinking about that morning in Westfield when Judge Brennan had dismissed her documentation without even looking at it. She thought about how that casual dismissal had felt, like being erased, like her truth didn't matter because someone with more power had decided it didn't. The defense's exhibits are admitted, she said clearly. The court will review all documentation provided regardless of source. In this courtroom, evidence is weighed by its credibility and relevance, not by assumptions about who's providing it. The prosecutor looked surprised. The public defender looked grateful, and Nia felt something click into place. This was why she'd endured everything. This moment right here, ensuring that one defendant in one courtroom got fair treatment. Multiply that by thousands of cases over decades of service, and maybe the system actually became what it claimed to be. That evening, she met Patricia for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. The governor looked exhausted but satisfied, the kind of tired that came from accomplishing something meaningful. The latest polling shows 73% approval for the judicial reforms, Patricia said, reviewing her tablet while they waited for food. Recidivism rates in counties that implemented the new protocols are down 18%. Public defender offices report they can actually meet with clients multiple times before trial. And get this, applications to public defender offices are up 42% because people actually want to do the job now that they have resources. That's good, Nia said. That's exactly what we hoped would happen. It's better than good. It's transformative. Nia, we didn't just fix Westfield, we changed how the entire state approaches criminal justice. Patricia put down her tablet. I have to ask, was it worth it? The assault, the custody, the months of scrutiny? Nia touched the small scar on her lip, now mostly faded but still visible if you looked closely. Every time I see a defendant walk into my courtroom and actually believe they might get fair treatment, I think yes. Every time I hear about a public defender who has time to build a real defense, I think yes. Every time someone like Marcus Webb tells me they didn't give up because I didn't give up, yes, it was worth it. And the cost? The trauma of what you experienced? Trauma that thousands of people experience every year without cameras or federal investigators or governors backing them up. At least mine had purpose. At least mine changed something. Patricia raised her glass. To changing things. Nia clinked her glass against Patricia's. To changing everything. 3 years later, Judge Nia Cross was reviewing case files in her chambers when her clerk brought news that the Westfield Courthouse federal monitoring period had been successfully completed. The courthouse had met every benchmark, implemented every reform, and demonstrated sustained commitment to fair and transparent justice. Federal oversight was being lifted. That weekend, Nia drove to Westfield for the first time since her confirmation. The courthouse looked the same from outside. Same red brick, same white columns, same American flag. But inside, everything was different. New security protocols greeted visitors with respect rather than suspicion. The holding cells had been renovated with better conditions and mandatory medical checks. Public defenders had private offices where they could actually meet with clients. Every courtroom had cameras recording proceedings, available for public review. And on the wall in the main lobby, there was a plaque. Nia stopped to read it, though she'd been told about its installation months ago. In memory of all those who suffered injustice in this building, and in recognition of Dr. Nia Cross, whose courage in documenting systemic abuse led to comprehensive reform. May this courthouse serve as a reminder that justice requires constant vigilance and that no one, regardless of their authority, is above accountability. Dedicated November 2025. Laura Martinez found her standing in front of the plaque. The officer wore sergeant stripes now. She'd been promoted after testifying and had become a leader in the department's reform training program. "Strange seeing your name on a wall," Laura asked. "Strange seeing this building transformed," Nia replied. "It almost doesn't feel like the same place." "It's not. We've processed 3,000 cases through here since the reforms took effect. Not one sustained complaint about judicial bias. Not one brutality allegation that wasn't immediately and thoroughly investigated. It's not perfect. Nowhere is perfect. But it's so much better than it was." "How are the other officers adapting?" "Some left. Couldn't handle the accountability. Others stayed and learned to do the job right. Turns out when you treat people with dignity and respect, the job's actually easier. Who knew?" Laura smiled. "We've got a new recruiting class starting next month. Youngest, most diverse class in department history. They're joining because they heard we're doing things differently here." They stood together looking at the plaque, two women who'd been on opposite sides of a cell door and who'd both chosen courage when it mattered most. "Do you ever regret it?" Laura asked quietly. "Taking those photographs, testifying, everything that followed?" "Every day I wake up wearing this robe, I think about the people who wore it before me and used it to oppress rather than serve. Then I think about Marcus Webb and Sharon Mitchell and everyone else who the system tried to break. And I think, no, I don't regret it. Not for a second." "Good," Laura said. "Because you changed my life. You changed this whole department. Hell, you changed the entire state." "We changed it," Nia corrected. "You, me, Patricia, Margaret, every witness who came forward, every legislator who voted for reform, every citizen who demanded accountability. Systems don't change because one person acts. They change because enough people decide the old way isn't acceptable anymore." 5 years after that morning in Westfield Courthouse, when Officer Derek Paulson's hand connected with her face, Judge Nia Cross was nominated to the state Supreme Court. The confirmation process was contentious but ultimately successful. She took her new oath in the same State House rotunda where she'd been sworn in as a Superior Court judge, surrounded by many of the same faces: Patricia, now finishing her second term as governor; Marcus Webb, who'd just graduated from law school and was clerking for a federal judge; Sharon Mitchell, who ran a nonprofit helping people navigate the criminal justice system; and Laura Martinez, now a lieutenant leading community policing initiatives. In her acceptance speech, Nia spoke about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She didn't shy away from the violence she'd experienced or the corrupt system she'd exposed, but she focused most on what came after: the reforms, the accountability, the thousands of people whose lives had been changed by a system that finally worked the way it was supposed to. 5 years ago, I walked into a courthouse and experienced injustice firsthand, she said, her voice carrying across the rotunda. Today, I walk into this Supreme Court with a responsibility to ensure that experience informs every decision I make. Justice isn't abstract. It's not theoretical. It's what happens when a single mother facing jail time for driving to work gets fair treatment. It's what happens when a young man brutalized by police can file a complaint and know it will be taken seriously. It's what happens when judges remember that the robe they wear represents a promise to serve all people equally, not just those with power and privilege. She paused, looking out at the crowd. I carry scars from my experience in Westfield, but I also carry something else: proof that systems can change, that accountability is possible, and that courage combined with documentation can transform institutions that seem immovable. To everyone watching who's facing injustice right now, who feels powerless against corrupt authority, who wonders if speaking up will matter, it matters. Your voice matters. Your documentation matters. Your refusal to accept injustice matters. Because change isn't handed down from people in power. It's forced up from people who refuse to stay silent. The applause that followed was thunderous, sustained, and full of hope that justice might actually mean something again. That night, after the ceremonies and receptions and congratulations, Nia returned to her apartment alone. She made tea, settled into her favorite chair, and opened the journal she'd been keeping since that first morning in Westfield. Page after page of observations, reflections, and plans for what came next. On a fresh page, she wrote, "Today I joined the state Supreme Court. Tomorrow I start the work of ensuring no one else has to experience what I experienced to force the system to be fair. The battle isn't over. It never will be. But we're winning. One case at a time, one reform at a time, one courageous witness at a time, we're building something better." She closed the journal and looked out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, people were being processed through the criminal justice system right now. Some were being treated fairly, some weren't. The work of reform was never finished. It was a constant process of vigilance and correction, and refusing to let old patterns reemerge. But Westfield had proven it was possible. And if it was possible there, it was possible everywhere. Judge Nia Cross, soon to be Justice Cross, smiled and took another sip of tea. The bruises had healed. The split lip had scarred over. But the memory remained sharp, a reminder of why this work mattered, and what she was fighting for every time she put on that robe. Tomorrow she'd start hearing cases at the state Supreme Court level, setting precedents that would shape justice across the entire state for decades. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd walked into a courthouse powerless and emerged with the authority to reshape the system that had tried to break her. Derek Paulson was serving year 6 of his 8-year sentence. Marcus Brennan was in year 4 of 5. The Westfield Courthouse operated under new leadership with transparent processes and regular audits. Hundreds of wrongful convictions had been reviewed and overturned. Thousands of people had received justice they never thought possible. And in courthouses across the state, judges now understood that immunity wasn't absolute, that authority came with accountability, and that one person with courage and documentation could bring down an entire corrupt system. The slap that Officer Paulson delivered in open court had been intended to silence Nia Cross, to put her in her place, to remind her that she was powerless against his authority. Instead, it became the spark that burned down a system built on abuse and rebuilt it on justice. And that, Nia thought as she finished her tea and prepared for the challenges ahead, was exactly how it should be.